Chapter 1044. Early in the morning, as soon as Meg opened his eyes, he saw Amy sitting at the head of the bed, looking at him worriedly. "What's wrong, Amy? Why did you wake up so early today?" Meg sat up and asked softly. "Last night, I dreamed that the kindest and most loving person in the world fell. And then? So I wanted to ask you when I woke up. Does it hurt?" Amy reached out her little hand and touched Meg's forehead, her little face full of worry. Meg felt his heart tremble. It was so early in the morning, why was the little girl so sweet? It was so sweet that it reached his heart. "Father is fine. Although I fell, I jumped up before I hit the ground. You see, I'm fine everywhere." Meg smiled and raised his arm, full of happiness. "Father is fine, that's great." Amy's face also showed a smile. "Okay, then Father will get up and prepare something delicious for you." Meg patted the little girl's head, got out of bed, washed up, and went downstairs. Only then did he notice a video record in his mind. Meg opened the video record while drinking water. In the video, 2 Minotaur demons attacked the restaurant, but the restaurant's defense system bounced them back. Meg, who was drinking water, almost choked to death. 2 stupid thieves in the middle of the night. "But system, your bouncing skill is quite interesting." Meg, who finally stopped coughing, praised the system in his mind. It was a pity that there was no internet in this world. Otherwise, this video would definitely go viral. Putting down the cup, Meg couldn't help but want to go out and see if the wooden door, which was kicked and thrown a stone yesterday, was broken. As soon as he opened the door, an envelope fell from the doorknob. "This is..." Meg picked up the envelope. On the grass-green envelope, there was a beautiful handwriting, "To Mr. Meg. Who wrote this letter to me? I don't have any friends I need to send a letter to." Meg was a little puzzled. The handwriting looked like a woman's. This shouldn't be a love letter, right? Meg muttered as he prepared to open the envelope. Did someone write a love letter to Father? Amy, who had come downstairs at some point, came over and looked curiously at the envelope in Meg's hand. No, this is just an ordinary letter." Meg quickly shook his head. Although he was touched just now, it was undeniable that the little fellow still had the identity of a spy. Some words could not be passed to Irina's ears. Otherwise, it would be impossible to explain. "It's okay, Father. I won't tell big sister Irina. Just read the letter to me." Amy shook Meg's arm and begged. Okay. I'll read it." Meg's heart softened at Amy's shaking. He opened the envelope and read, "Mr. Meg, I love you." Meg only recited one sentence before he couldn't continue the rest of his sentence. This is really a fucking love letter. Shouldn't a professional love letter first express the pain of not being able to get what you want, then implicitly express your feelings of love, and finally end with the main topic? Who would go straight to the main topic at the beginning? This standard, only a primary school student could write something like this, right? Meg's soul of ridicule had already started to become restless. But speaking of love letters, he remembered his young self. He had secretly fallen in love with a little girl with a ponytail sitting in front of him. After enduring the pain of lovesickness for 3 days, he couldn't help but write a love letter. He still remembered the specific content. It was roughly like this: "Oh, my Juliet." Alright, Meg did not want to recall too much. In short, he was indeed a little surprised by this straightforward opening. It's really a love letter. Who could have written it? Could it be that she wants to be my mother? Amy looked curiously at the envelope in Meg's hand. Many people had already surfaced in her mind. Sister Gina doesn't know how to write. Then Sister Mia, Sister Elizabeth, Sister Barbara, Sister Phyllis, Sister Gloria, Teacher Luna, Sister Hill, and Sister Shirley. They all seem to be interested in father. Then who wrote this love letter? Sister Irene has so many love rivals. What should I do? Amy mumbled softly with a troubled expression on her little face. That. Amy, actually, this might just be a prank. What era is it now? Who would write such an old-fashioned love letter? Ha ha ha. Meg laughed awkwardly but politely. Although he was also curious about who wrote it, he felt a chill run down his spine when he heard Amy's mumbling. If this were to reach Irene's ears, who knew how many washboards he would have to kneel and break before he could cover it up? It's all right, father. I will definitely help you find the person who wrote this love letter, Amy consoled him with a smile. I'm even more afraid when you're like this. Meg thought to himself. As usual, Phyllis was the first to arrive at the restaurant. As soon as Phyllis entered, Amy went up to her and asked with a smile, Sister Beansprout, do you like father? Ah. Phyllis was stunned for a moment. When she realized what Amy was asking, she blushed immediately. She glanced at Meg, who was standing at the side with a look of despair, and quickly looked away. She pinched the corner of her shirt and said shyly, Boss is a very good person. I think everyone will like him. That means you like my father too. Amy blinked and muttered softly, I treat you like an older sister, but you want to be my mother. I'm not. Phyllis's face was as red as an apple. She was so embarrassed that she wanted to find a hole to hide in. Then did you write a love letter to father? Amy continued to ask. Love letter. Phyllis was stunned for a moment, but this time she shook her head decisively. No. All right, I believe you. Amy nodded, a little disappointed. Someone wrote a love letter to Mr. Meg. Who is trying to make a move on Mr. Meg? Phyllis entered the kitchen, feeling as if her heart was being hung up. Next to her were Mia, Elizabeth, and Barbara. Sister Mia, Sister Elizabeth, and Sister Barbara, do you like father? Amy asked the three of them. Yes, I like boss a lot. Mia nodded seriously. Elizabeth glanced at Meg. He's a good person. Barbara also glanced at Mag. She coughed softly, and said, I don't like men. Then did you write a love letter to him? Amy continued to ask. Chapter 10:45. The three of them looked at Meg in shock. Meg shrugged, indicating that he did not know what was going on. Then, the three of them looked at each other again with a hint of scrutiny in their eyes. They did not feel anything when they interacted with each other every day, but after thinking about it carefully, they realized that Meg was indeed a very good man. He looked mature, steady, and handsome, and was much gentler than those hotheads. He was also very kind and dared to take responsibility for his actions. Moreover, he had an adorable little daughter. If they married him, they would not even have to think about having children. What could be more perfect? Of course, most importantly, his superb culinary skills and the endless supply of delicious food in his hands. If they married him, there was probably nothing more blissful in this world, right? At this thought, even Elizabeth could not help but look at Meg a few more times. No, I have to be single if I want to become the chief of the Frost Dragon tribe. Otherwise, I'll waste a lot of my cultivation time by dating every day. Elizabeth shook her head slightly to calm herself down. Moreover, the dragon race has a lifespan of thousands of years. Humans can only live for 100 years at most. It's destined that it's impossible between us. If I can marry Boss, that'll be so blissful. Yabamiya's eyes lit up like little stars, but they quickly dimmed. But I don't know anything, I'm not good looking, and I'm an orphan. I definitely won't be good enough for Boss. That's really regrettable. Marry him. Barbara's eyes showed that she was thinking, but she quickly shook her head. No, he's just a commoner, and I'm the princess of the Moon Nation. Father will definitely not agree to this marriage. But, why do I have an inexplicable feeling of regret? If Father tries the food he cooks, he might change his mind. No. Why am I thinking about this? I'm the princess of the Moon Nation, but the beef kebab is really delicious. If I go back to the Moon Nation, will I not be able to eat it anymore? Barbara was in a dilemma whether to agree or not. Maybe it's a prank. Meg hurriedly tried to smooth things over. Although he didn't know who wrote the love letter, it was too strange to take a love letter and ask them if they liked him. Good morning, Uncle Meg, Amy, and all my sisters. At this moment, Anna and Shirley pushed the door open and greeted everyone with a smile. Anna, what's this on your head? Meg asked curiously as he looked at the hat on Anna's head that had two antennas sticking out of it. Could it be that this little cutie was cosplaying as a Teletubby today? This is the bunny hat that Sister Shirley gave me, Anna said with a smile. She stretched out her hand and tapped her ear. The two cylinders shook, and two chicken heads popped out from the top, letting out a loud and clear cry. Wow, that's amazing! Amy's eyes widened as she clapped. It's a little cute for some reason. The girls also looked at Anna's hat in surprise. Shirley raised her chin slightly, and her expression was very indifferent. However, the slight curl of her lips revealed her smug mood. This is really the mudslide of a bunny hat. Meg opened his mouth and didn't know how to praise her for a moment. Amy quickly returned to the topic. She looked at the two of them and asked curiously, Sister Shirley, Sister Anna, do you like my father? Did you write him a love letter? Love letter? But I haven't grown up yet. Anna shook her head with a hint of regret in her voice. Shirley glanced at Meg, and the corners of her lips curled up slightly, revealing a strange smile. She shook her head and said, I don't like men, especially men with beards. As soon as she said that, the girls fell into deep thought and moved away from her. Shirley glanced at the girls and said lightly, I don't like women either. Everyone looked at her. She didn't like men, nor did she like women. Then what did she like? Then, do you like transvestites? Amy asked curiously. How is that possible? Shirley almost choked to death. Looking at the innocent Amy, she felt like she was looking at Princess Irina back then. However, she couldn't get angry. She could only sigh and say helplessly, I only like myself. A beautiful person like me probably won't be able to like anyone else in this lifetime. TSK. Everyone rolled their eyes. They had seen narcissistic people before, but they had never seen someone narcissistic to this extent. From everyone's reaction, Meg had basically eliminated everyone's suspicions. Because if it was really done by one of the girls, there was no need to put the love letter on the door. They could have found an opportunity to stuff it into his pocket. Wouldn't that be more obvious and simple? In that case, the suspect was most likely outside the restaurant. Until now, Meg had already forgotten how many guests had confessed to him. There were more than 100 women alone, not including men, therefore, this clue was equivalent to invalid. Of course, Meg really wasn't too curious about who wrote the love letter to him. After all, the number of people who called him hubby back then could circle the earth a few times while holding hands. If he really wanted to find out, wouldn't he be exhausted to death? Moreover, if the girl who wrote the love letter wasn't pranking him, then as long as he waited, she would come out sooner or later. He was right here. Could it be that they could bypass him? Madam, you didn't sign your name on the love letter. Will he know it was written by you? If he doesn't know, wouldn't our efforts be in vain? In a shadow outside Amy's, the black cat servant looked at Camilla worriedly. A devilish smile appeared on Camilla's face. She licked her red lips and said, "Not letting him know is my goal. I want to use this love letter to mess up his heart and make him think that there's really someone around him who likes him. This stinky man will definitely not be able to resist the urge to verify who wrote the love letter to him. He might even do something even more impatient. As long as he shows his true face and lets Miss Gloria see it clearly, then everything will be resolved." "Then you said before that you would personally, wouldn't that be letting this stinky man off easy?" "It's not yet time for me to personally take action. I have plenty of ways to deal with stinky men like this," Camilla said rather confidently. "Gloria, do you like my father?" You know everything." I only secretly like him in my heart." Gloria's expression changed slightly and she even stuttered a little when she spoke. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 1046. There was an uproar at the entrance of the restaurant. Everyone looked at Gloria, who was frantically answering Amy's question, in shock. "No, Mr. Mac is mine." The women looked nervous, but when they saw Gloria's beautiful face and elegant temperament, they felt a little discouraged. They didn't know which family she came from, but whether it was in terms of appearance or temperament, she was indeed very compatible with Mr. Mac. Even their height made them look like a pair of jade people when they stood together. It was enviable. Mr. Mac is simply a goddess harvester. This is too much. Yeah, there are already so many beautiful women in the restaurant, but Mr. Mac doesn't even let the customers off. He's a beast. The men, on the other hand, were furious. "Do you like me?" Meg was also a little surprised. He looked at Gloria, who was blushing and looking down, not daring to look at him. He felt a little strange. Gloria was indeed a very beautiful woman. She was comparable to Irina. She had a quiet and obedient temperament. She didn't have a sharp edge, but people couldn't ignore her. She had a delicate heart and made people feel very comfortable when they were around her. If it was in his previous life, Meg would have put her at the top of his list of interested people. However, he was no longer the playboy from before. He had Amy and a wife, Irina. This was a very strange bond. He and Irina had only met a few times, but they had gone through life and death together. That woman who had a clear and strong personality and would show her gentle side to Amy had left an indelible mark in his heart. He didn't know if he had fallen in love with her. He also couldn't be sure that she would be the one for him in the future. However, before he brought her back from the wind forest and gave her true freedom, he probably wouldn't consider dating another woman. This would make him feel like a scumbag. Although he had never thought of himself as a good man, he really wanted to be a good father, a father that Amy would be proud of. "No. You can't do this. That's not how the script was written." Camilla's face turned pale as she clutched her chest in pain. This love letter seems to have given him an assist. The black cat servant gulped, also a little stunned. If he agrees, then the two of them will walk into the wedding hall hand in hand. "No. I can't let the plot continue like this." A black club appeared in Camilla's hand as she stared fiercely at Meg. "Madam, don't be rash. This is Chaos City, and if you kill him in front of Miss Gloria, she will hate you for the rest of her life." The black cat hurriedly pulled Camilla back. "Am I supposed to just watch the two of them be together?" Camilla stomped her feet in anger. Let's see, good heavens. What did I say? I actually said that I like Mr. Meg." Gloria's heart was also in a complete mess. She had been thinking about something before she entered the room, and when Amy asked her that question, she accidentally blurted out what was on her mind. She could feel everyone's eyes on her, and she wanted nothing more than to dig a hole in the ground and hide in it. Will Mr. Meg think that I'm a strange woman? He won't like me, right? Will we not be friends in the future? She didn't dare to look up at Meg. Her heart was in a mess, and she was so anxious that she was about to cry. It's all right, big sister Gloria. You're so pretty. Even if you want to be my mother, I won't find it hard to accept, Amy consoled. Wow! Even little boss approves. There was an uproar at the restaurant's entrance again. Of course, most of them were women's screams. Gloria's face became even redder, but a glimmer of hope and anticipation welled up in her heart. If Amy agreed, do you all like me? Right at this moment, Meg took a step forward and looked at the customers at the entrance. Mr. Mac, I love you. Mr. Mac, I want to give birth to your babies. The women screamed and professed their love in a frenzy. There were also some burly men, orcs, and demons among them. Looks like everyone really likes my food. I like all of you too. Meg smiled. He then turned to Gloria and said, Miss Gloria, do you still want to eat tofu pudding today? You always order a portion. It looks like you really do like it. Huh? Yeah. A hint of disappointment flashed through Gloria's eyes, but she hurriedly nodded. A smile reappeared on her face, and she nodded at Meg. Yes, Mr. Meg's tofu pudding really is irresistible. Thank you for the compliment. Meg also nodded with a smile. That's good enough. Why did they have to make it so awkward? Even if they couldn't date now, they could still continue to be friends. Huh? Is this fellow's brain damaged? Camilla, who was about to rush out with her club, suddenly stopped in her tracks and looked at Meg in shock. Yes, such a good opportunity was placed in front of him. As long as he agreed, everything would be logical. He actually rejected it. The black cat was also dumbfounded. It seems that I have overestimated him. With his intelligence, normal methods will not be effective. We must use some unconventional methods. Camilla put away the club in her hand. Unconventional methods. Yes. Camilla nodded, and then began to take things out. Ropes, whips, candles. The black cat counted all the things Camilla took out at the side. On this day, an announcement from the Roth Empire was spread across the Norland continent. The announcement was very short, but the information in the announcement caused a huge uproar. General Alex was promoted to the Grand Marshal of the Roth Empire's military. This announcement was sent to the upper echelons of all the races as quickly as possible. At the same time, it also became the headlines of all the magazines and newspapers. Bullshit. Alex was almost killed by them back then. Now that he's back, how could he still work for them? Andre, that old dog, he's terrifyingly evil. The Dwarf King slammed the letter in his hand onto the ground, and said angrily. Andre, that old dog, is indeed scheming. Although we don't know if Alex will agree, the way he did it before the negotiation made it impossible to ignore Alex's existence. The Goblin High Priest looked at the letter in his hand with worry in his eyes. That old man, he's dreaming. Meg pursed his lips as he looked at the newspaper headline in his hand, and threw the newspaper into the rubbish bin. Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 1047. Upon seeing this news, Meg's first reaction was indeed a little shock. The Grand Marshal of the military was the head of the Roth Empire's military. A person who controlled the Empire's military was only second to the king in the Roth Empire. His real power and prestige far exceeded the two princes. It was precisely because of this that the position of the Roth Empire's Grand Marshal had been vacant for many years. The military was directly controlled by the king, who directly commanded the 8 marshals. But now, the king had given such a powerful position to Alex. His actions were extremely strange. However, Meg was not a newbie who had just arrived in this world, after all. He quickly guessed the Wrath King's sinister intentions. Even if Andre gave the king to him and allowed him to return to Rodu, he wouldn't take a second look. Although it was basically confirmed that Josh had colluded with the demons, orcs, and elves in the Rainy Night assassination more than 3 years ago, that was Rodu, after all. So many 10th-tier powerhouses had been mobilized to cut off all contact with the military. Meg would be ashamed of his own intelligence if he said that Andre knew nothing about it. And the last time in Rodu, Sean had colluded with the demons to kill Irina. There was also the shadow of the royal palace behind it. Sean and Josh were fighting to the death in front of the stage, but what really caught Meg's attention was that king who didn't show his emotions on his face. This old man was very evil. As for why he suddenly announced that he would make him the Grand Marshal of the military at this juncture, it was not difficult to figure out the reason after thinking about it carefully. In order to save Irina previously, he had killed the ancestor of the Void, Benson, and announced his return in a high-profile manner. It could be said that he had become famous again. The title of the #1 knight of the Norland continent was not for nothing. It represented absolute power and absolute appeal in the military. And 2 months later, the Norland continent would be negotiating a peace agreement. If the negotiations could be carried out at the negotiating table, he would become an important bargaining chip for the Roth Empire. And once the negotiations broke down and the various races resumed war, his existence would also make the various races more wary. He didn't even have to do anything. It was enough to just hang his name there. With Sean's and Josh's hatred for him, they would definitely not make such a suggestion to the king. This gave Meg a deeper understanding of that old fox's cunning. Compared to his 2 impatient sons, Andre, who had been sitting quietly on the throne for decades, was more like a wolf that hid its fangs. That was a good plan. Given Alex's character, he would most likely agree to it because of his relationship with the Roth Empire. But he wasn't Alex. He was Meg. Whoever made him unhappy, he had to get back at them. Gina, Phyllis, Anna, I'm going out. Meg threw the newspaper into the trash can and said something to the kitchen before pushing his bicycle out. The lights were dim in a completely sealed meeting room within the City Lord mansion. 3 figures were seated in front of a round table. They were relatively far away and their expressions were somewhat grave. It seems like King Andre doesn't intend to maintain the original peace agreement. Even if he doesn't start a war, he will most likely request for the current territory to be reset, Michael said with a grave expression. It's not just Andre. The demons, orcs, forest trolls, elves, and all the other races that had improved greatly in the past 100 years want to reset the territory. The demons were the ones who made the most noise back then. However, after Benson and 6 10th-tier powerhouses were killed by Alex and Irina, they lost a lot of power, so they restrained themselves a lot. The Grey Temple's lord, Roland, who was wearing a grey robe, shook his head slightly, and spoke in a low voice. We had already expected this, but we didn't expect him to push Alex to the front. Initially, all the races were still guessing if Alex would return to the Roth Empire. After all, the royal family couldn't wash their hands clean of what happened back then, Novin said with a frown with a hint of worry. Michael also frowned. This will depend on Alex's attitude. Whether he will return to the Roth Empire or not. Once he returns, the cracks in the Roth Empire's military that were caused by his mysterious death back then will be wiped away. The Roth Empire's military will be completely united and have a terrifying cohesion. This is not a good thing for the other races. Given Alex's character, he most likely won't say anything about this. Once he agrees, all the other races will have to include him in the Roth Empire's camp. In this way, the Roth Empire's power will surpass all the other races except the giant dragons. The peace agreement in 2 months' time will be led by them. To us, the situation will become very disadvantageous, Roland said. Yes. Although Alex is just one person, he has become a person who can affect the balance of all the races in the current situation of the Norland continent. Novin's voice was filled with emotions. The goblins and dwarves have already formed an underground alliance with us. The two of them are currently the two weakest races on the Norland continent. If the peace agreement doesn't go smoothly this time, the two races will be forced to hand over their territories, or even face the danger of being attacked. With the combined efforts of us and the two races, the steam locomotive tracks are being laid very quickly. However, we still don't know how many bargaining chips we can get in the negotiations, Michael said. Roland nodded, and said in a low voice, Chaos City's position is to try our best to keep all parties on the negotiating table. Once the negotiations break down and we enter the stage of war, Chaos City will most likely become the first target. Novin smiled, and said, then, what we have to wait for now is Alex's response. I hope he won't disappoint us this time. The response that the entire Norland continent was waiting for came much faster than anyone expected. Howl! A loud cry spread throughout the Dragon Islands, attracting the attention of all the giant dragons on the various Dragon Islands. Who is this familiar voice? It's Alex's mount. Alex has appeared. Very soon, the Dragon Islands were in an uproar. The entire Norland continent was waiting for Alex's response to the Roth Empire's king's command. In the end, he appeared on the Dragon Islands. The purple-striped griffin glided over the Dragon Islands arrogantly and finally landed on the glass Dragon Island in the center. Alex, who was sitting on the griffin's back, held his sword with one hand, and left 2 lines of words on the glass dragon pillar. I'm not going to be the Grand Marshal. I want this world to be peaceful. Alex. It wasn't until the purple figure disappeared into the horizon that the great elder of the glass dragon tribe ran out in exasperation. He pointed to the sky and cursed, Alex, you fucking carved words on our tribe's sacred object again. Don't run if you dare. Great elder, why didn't you stop him when he was still here? He's already far away now. Idiot, if he's not far away, do you dare to force him? I've always listened to my heart. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, Wonderful Book House. Calm. Chapter 1048. The Glass Dragon Tribe was the #1 dragon tribe on the Dragon Island. Back then, Alex came to the Dragon Island for the first time, and had a huge battle with the great elder of the Glass Dragon Tribe. After winning, he carved a line of words on the glass dragon pillar. Alex and Irina came here. After so many years, Alex came to Glass Dragon Island again, and carved words on the glass dragon pillar again. However, this time, it was not a visit, but a high-profile response to the Roth Empire's announcement that had just shaken the continent. Alex's response was simple and extremely arrogant. Soon, this response spread across the Norland continent at lightning speed, and caused a huge commotion. Ha ha ha, great. As expected of Alex. That old dog, Andre, must be looking terrible now. In the dwarf palace, the king of dwarves looked at the news he just received, and laughed heartily. The 3 big shots of Chaos City gathered twice in a day. This is really unexpected and comforting news. It seems like we should contact Alex. After all, we have the same goal, Michael said with a smile. I chased this chap down 18 streets back then. Roland's lips curled up slightly with a smile. A year later, he chased you down 36 streets, Novin said with pursed lips. A wave of hearty laughter sounded in the meeting room. Norland Empire, Rodu, in a tavern. Have you heard? Lord Alex refuses to be the Empire's Grand Marshal, a fatty said softly. I was just about to tell you about this. I have a friend who works in the intelligence agency. The latest news we got is that Lord Alex came to Glass Dragon Island, and left 2 lines of words on the Glass Dragon pillar. Guess what those words are? A skinny middle-aged man said mysteriously. What words? The people in the tavern couldn't help but stop what they were doing and listen carefully. I'm not going to be the Grand Marshal. I want this world to be peaceful, that man said in a low voice. Gasps could be heard in the tavern. When they heard that Lord Alex had become the military's Grand Marshal this morning, almost the entire Roth Empire was excited. The god of war had returned to protect the Roth Empire again. How exciting was that? However, after only half a day, a piece of news spread back to Rodu, and it was like a resounding slap to everyone's face. The so-called promotion was just the king's wishful thinking. Alex personally responded and refused to be the Grand Marshal. Moreover, his words were extremely strong and did not give the king any face. Could it be that Master Alex is no longer protecting the Roth Empire? Someone sobbed softly with deep disappointment. Everyone present also couldn't hide their melancholy. Once upon a time, the invincible Alex was the pride of the Roth Empire. He was the reason why every human could walk with their heads held high in front of other species. But now, this confidence might no longer belong to them. Sho! Do you not want to live anymore? How dare you say such things here? The few newspapers in Rodu have all received a notice. They are not allowed to report a single word about this matter. Otherwise, they will all be arrested and beheaded. A middle-aged man in a long robe at the side chided softly. I'm being nosy. I was just saying. Don't take it seriously. I still have something to do at home. I'll take my leave first. The middle-aged man's expression changed drastically. He found an excuse and fled. Everyone else's expression changed when they heard that. They settled the bill and got up to leave, afraid of getting into trouble. Similar things were happening all over Rodu. Although not everyone knew the details, the news of Alex refusing to be the Grand Marshal still spread quickly throughout Rodu, and became a secret that everyone knew. In the palace's main hall, the 2 princes, 10-odd military officials, and the president of the Magus Tower, Richard, were all standing with grave expressions. The news that they received a few hours ago cast a shadow over everyone's faces. No one expected Alex to give such a strong and direct reply. Bastard! This Alex actually dares to be so arrogant and disregard royal father. He has made the Roth Empire the laughing stock of the entire continent. In the main hall, Sean couldn't hide his anger as he looked at the king, and said, "Royal father. I think we should issue a kill order and kill Alex. Only then can we save the Empire's face." However, there was a hint of joy in his eyes. "Royal father, I also agree with royal brother on this matter. If we don't punish Alex, the Roth Empire won't be able to raise its head in the meeting of the various races 2 months later," Josh also said with a grave expression. Many of the other military officials in the hall also spoke up to support the 2 princes. They wanted to make Alex pay the price to restore the Empire's prestige. The crowd was agitated. It was as if they would chop Alex's head back with their swords as long as the king gave the order. "Your Highnesses, Lords, and General, what you said is not without reason. Alex's actions and words have disregarded His Majesty's orders, and brought shame to the Roth Empire. He is indeed unforgivable." Right at this moment, an old official standing in the corner stepped out, and asked everyone calmly, "However, if His Majesty really gives the order to kill Alex, who here can kill him? Who has the confidence to kill him before the peace talks 2 months later? How many top-notch combat powers do the military and the Magus Tower have to sacrifice to kill him? I wonder if all of you have considered this before." Once the old official said that, everyone fell silent. Killing Alex was something that many people wanted to do. But in the past many years, Other than the extremely calculated siege on the rainy night 3 years ago, no one had succeeded. The number of assassins and killers who had died in his hands was innumerable. However, even in that ambush 3 years ago, with the right time, place, and people, and with tens of 10th-tier powerhouses, Alex's daughter as a hostage, he still didn't die. In that case, now that they didn't even know what he looked like and where he was, it was almost impossible to kill him. Even if they sent out all the 10th-tier powerhouses from the military and the Magus Tower, as long as they couldn't form an ambush, the people who found him first would only be killed. Back then, Alex had dominated the continent, and everyone didn't have a strong concept of how powerful he was. But now, he was standing on the opposite side of the empire. His power was a headache for the entire empire. The hall was silent. Even Sean and Josh were silent. Who said I want to kill him? As long as he is still alive, the mark of the Roth Empire on him will never be erased. He is still the guardian of the Roth Empire. Can he really watch the Roth Empire perish? Andre, who had been silent all this while, said with a cold smile. However, there was a strong murderous intent in his smile. Book Guesthouse Reading Website. Chapter 1049. At the periphery of the Wind Forest, the rebel elves' temporary base. An elf walked quickly into the largest tent, and looked at Irina, who was looking at the map, delightedly said, "Your Highness, the agreement with the goblins has been reached. We will be allowed to build a base in the underground caverns in an area of the Geta mountain range." Very good. Irina turned around with the same smile on her face. She nodded and said, "According to the original plan, let our people retreat into the underground caverns in batches, and set up a new line of defense according to the terrain of the underground caverns." All right. That elf nodded. He looked at Irina, and hesitantly said, "Your Highness, I heard a piece of news from the goblins just now. You might be interested in it." "What news?" Irina asked. "This morning, the king of the Roth Empire announced that Alex has been promoted to the position of Grand Marshal of the military." Ha! This must be fake news released by that old dog for the various races meeting in 2 months' time to increase his bargaining chip in the negotiation. Irina sneered and regretfully said, "It's a pity that Alex is a fool. He definitely won't say anything about this. That old dog has already calculated this." "No, Lord Alex has responded." That elf shook his head. "Responded?" Irina raised her voice. No one in this world should know better than her what kind of person Alex was. How could he respond to something like this? "Don't tell me he agreed," Irina said with uncertainty. She wouldn't be too surprised if something like this happened to Alex. That elf shook his head with admiration and said, "No, Lord Alex rode the purple-striped griffin to Glass Dragon Island, and then carved 2 lines on that glass dragon pillar. I'm not going to be the Grand Marshal. I want this world to be peaceful." Irina's mouth opened slightly. After the initial shock, she was even more surprised. She smiled and said, "Has this fellow finally been enlightened?" A smile appeared on the elf's face at the sight of Irina's long-lost smile. Everyone on the Norland continent knew about the relationship between Irina and Master Alex. For the sake of the elven slaves living at the bottom of society, she initiated this rebellion. She gave up her noble identity and status as an elf, gave up the opportunity and freedom to be with Lord Alex forever, and was even willing to lead them into the dark catacombs. This kind of sacrifice was the reason why all the elves who risked their lives to leave the Wind Forest were willing to follow them to their deaths. "Wait, there's something I need you to do." Irina stopped the elf who was about to sneak out. She quickly walked to the table, picked up a pen and paper, and wrote a letter. She folded it and sealed it before handing it to the elf. She smiled and said, "Send this letter to the Lord of Chaos City's Grey Temple. It's time to announce something to the world. Yes. The elf clenched the letter in his hand and turned to walk out the door. However, just as she reached the entrance of the tent, Irina suddenly called out to her. Let me make a trip to Chaos City personally. The purple-striped griffin stopped at the top of the mountain. Meg patted Z's head and asked it to go back. Howl, Z rubbed its head against Mag's hand. It was very reluctant to part with Mag, but it kept looking back as it went into the cave. This made Meg feel a little guilty. He shouted in the direction of the cave, Z, I'll bring you delicious food next time. Howl, Z stuck its head out immediately, and let out an excited cry at Meg. Meg went down the mountain with a smile. He then took out his bicycle and rode toward Chaos City. This trip to Dragon Island could be said to have given him an award-winning performance. He displayed the arrogance and aura of a 10th-tier powerhouse to the extreme. However, it was also because Alex's reputation was strong enough that he was able to put on a show. He was also very satisfied with the 2 sentences that he had been thinking about along the way. One was a slap in the face, while the other was a statement of his stand. That wanton exhilaration made him even more eager to recover his strength. Not long after he entered the city, Mag sensed an indistinct aura following him, and that made him nervous all of a sudden. Is it a pervert who's coveting my beauty? Meg frowned. He felt that things weren't as simple as they seemed. However, on second thought, such perverts would usually target crossdressers like Shirley. The moment he took off his pants, they would most likely get even more excited. Could it be that I've been exposed? Mag's expression became even more wary. Even though he had always been very careful, and had never given himself away in front of any living beings, the timing of his departure from the city could very well be linked to what had happened to the dragon tribe. Even though it was unlikely that anyone would be able to make such a connection, he still considered the worst-case scenario out of caution. This aura doesn't seem very strong, but it's very good at hiding. Seems like I have to find an alley to settle this. Meg glanced diagonally behind him without batting an eyelid. He changed his direction and rode toward an alley at the side. Why isn't he going in the direction of the restaurant? A black shadow appeared in the corner and quickly disappeared. Meg could feel that the aura behind him was still following him. The winding alley was getting narrower, and the courtyard walls were getting taller. A smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. This kind of place was most suitable for a sneak attack. He wanted to see who was tailing him. The bicycle passed through an alley and was about to turn. Suddenly, a huge black club smashed out of the alley. Meg, who was caught off guard, thought of countless tricks to avoid the club in that instant. However, before he could do anything, the club had already smashed into his face. You've finally fallen into my hands. That was the only thing Mag heard before he fainted. There were also 2 long legs that were getting closer and closer, and, red. Madam, what should we do next? Should we just find a place to bury him? The black cat servant appeared on the courtyard wall, and looked at Meg lying on the ground, and asked softly. No, the motive is too obvious. It'll be easy to trace it back to us. Besides, if we kill him, I won't be able to eat delicious steak. Camilla shook her head, and looked at Meg lying on the ground. A wicked smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. We just need to make him feel that he's a complete pervert, and make him feel ashamed, and feel that he's not worthy of the pure and elegant Miss Gloria. Then, what should we do? Drag him away, we'll find another place. It's not good to do this kind of thing outside. Camilla's smile became even more seductive, and she turned and left, swaying her sexy waist. Chapter 1050. Why isn't boss back yet? It's almost time to open for business. There are so many customers waiting in line. What should we do? Yabamiya stood at the entrance of the restaurant and looked out. Did father say where he went? Amy stood at the entrance with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She looked a little worried. Boss only said that he was going out for a while this morning. He went out with his bicycle, but he didn't say where he was going. Phyllis shook her head. They didn't know where boss went either. Father, does he not want me anymore? Amy pouted. She felt a little wronged. Father had never left without telling her before. Yabamiya stroked Amy's head with a smile, and said, "How could that be? Boss dotes on little Amy. How could he not want you? He must have been delayed by something, and couldn't make it back in time. We're going to open for business in 5 minutes. We still haven't prepared a third of the ingredients, and the food that needs to be prepared in advance hasn't been prepared. Even if boss comes back now, it'll be too late," Shirley said. "Then what should we do? There are so many customers waiting in line. If we tell them that boss isn't around and ask them to come back next time, I'm afraid they'll smash the restaurant." Mia was a little worried. Elizabeth swept her gaze across the line, and calmly said, "We don't have to worry about smashing the restaurant. As long as the 2 great magic casters don't do anything, the rest of them won't be able to beat us. This should be very interesting." Barbara rubbed her hands together as she looked at the customers in the line. Shirley looked at the long line, and shook her head slightly. "If we don't inform them in advance and stop business for no reason, the restaurant's reputation will be greatly affected. We have to think of a way." Hearing this, everyone frowned and began to think carefully. Killing all the customers, giving each of them a copper coin, and hypnotizing them into thinking that they were full. After a series of strange thoughts, Phyllis said carefully, "Maybe I can make the kebabs." Everyone looked at Phyllis, and their eyes lit up. "Yeah, Phyllis's beef kebabs are already as good as Boss's. Why don't we change the theme to beef kebabs for lunch? That way, the customers in the line will at least have something to eat," Yabamiya said with surprise. Yabamiya's suggestion was unanimously approved by everyone. Soon, a new notice appeared at the entrance of the restaurant: "The boss is out and hasn't returned yet. Today, there will be a special roast beef kebab session. All customers are limited to 2 kebabs per person." As soon as the announcement came out, the customers in the queue immediately went into an uproar. "What's going on? Isn't it a little too much to have a beef kebab special? Although the beef kebabs are delicious, isn't it too much that each person can only eat 2? How can 2 skewers be enough to fill my stomach? But if Mr. Mac isn't here, then who made the kebabs?" Mag woke up to a rustling sound. He opened his eyes in a daze, and his eyes met with a pair of white and tender breasts. They were swaying up and down in front of his eyes, and the waves were raging. "The headlights of this car are so dazzling." Meg blinked and saw more clearly. Between the white and tender skin, there was a small mole, which added a bit of sexiness. Looking at the shaking of the headlights, it should be the E-car. It was definitely natural, otherwise, it wouldn't be swaying so naturally. Then, the memories before he fainted flooded Meg's mind. The narrow alley, the sudden appearance of a big club, everything ended there. Fuck. Have I been kidnapped? Meg raised an eyebrow. His gaze landed on the stage, and it landed on that seductive and familiar face that was almost touching his face. Countess Bartoli. Meg's expression was surprised but also somewhat expected. Since he came to this world, there were only a few women that had such a big heart, and this vampire countess was one of them. Meg knew her motive. It was most likely related to Gloria's unexpected confession to him this morning. From a long time ago, he knew that the countess was most likely a lesbian. After all, he had been warned twice by her using his real name. But he didn't expect that he would be knocked out and dragged away by her. If others knew that Alex, who had just been in the limelight on Dragon Island and rejected the position of the Roth Empire's marshal, was knocked out and then dragged into a small dark room, Meg shifted his gaze away from the swaying breasts in front of him and noticed that he was lying on a bench with his hands above his head. The sexy and charming Countess spread her legs on top of him. Her tight black dress made her perky buttocks burst out in a beautiful arc. Her white and tender long legs stretched all the way to the slit of her dress. A touch of red was faintly discernible. Her face was flushed, and her forehead was covered in sweat. Her misty and seductive eyes were even more alluring. But what was she doing? Giving him benefits? Or was she planning to use him to correct her sexual orientation? Meg was a little confused. Although he rejected it in his heart, his body lay flat and even closed his eyes. However, at this moment, Meg also felt a smooth rope sliding around his hand. "Are you trying to tie me up? You have many tricks up your sleeve." Meg raised his eyebrows. However, the rope slid around his hand a few times, but it fell down very quickly. It just didn't manage to tie him up successfully. Its movements were so clumsy that even Meg had the urge to help. Fuck. Why is this high-grade spirit-locking rope so difficult to tie up? I've been tying it up for half an hour and still can't tie it up. I'm so angry. Camilla's angry voice sounded from the side. She didn't notice that Meg had opened his eyes. The small dark room maintained an awkward scene. Meg lay quietly on the wooden bench with his eyes closed. Camilla lay on top of him and kept trying to tie the rope around his hand. Half an hour passed. Meg couldn't help but open his eyes. He looked at Camilla and said, "Do you need my help?" "Okay." "Ah." Camilla looked down at Meg, who had woken up and was stunned. After a while, she said, "When did you wake up?" "I've been awake for a while," Meg said honestly. He glanced sideways and noticed the whip and candle on the chair at the side. This familiar configuration, humph, how dare you pretend to be dead in front of me? Looks like I have to knock you out again. A black club appeared in Camilla's hand again. She muttered to herself, "No, I have to make him realize that he's a masochist." Meg did a quick calculation in his mind. Camilla's strength was level 9, and he was now at the peak of level 7. He definitely couldn't beat her. However, falling into an endless cycle of being knocked out was also not a solution. He didn't even know what time it was now. Therefore, he raised his hand and pointed at the thick red rope that was loosely tied around his hand. He smiled and said, "Countess, do you want to tie a rope? I'm very good at this. I can teach you. You really know how to." Camilla was a little doubtful. However, she was already on the verge of collapse after failing to tie the rope for so long. "Yes, it's actually very simple. I can demonstrate it to you." Meg's lips curled up slightly. He stood up from the wooden bed and the spirit-locking rope in his hand danced on Camilla's body. 5 minutes later, Meg looked at Camilla, who was tied up by the red rope, and nodded with satisfaction. "Look, this is a perfect tortoiseshell." Chapter 1051. I haven't been here for 3 years, and there's still no change. How disappointing. On the streets of Chaos City, Irina, who was wearing a white veil hat, was looking around with a smile on her face. "His restaurant seems to be called Mamie's, right? I have to ask someone for directions," Irina mumbled softly as she turned and walked into an alley. 5 minutes later, Irina was holding a chair in the corner of the alley. She looked at the weak and helpless forest troll curled up in the corner, and calmly asked, "Tell me, what do you know?" "Mamie's is in Aiden Square. If you go now, you won't be able to make it in time for dinner. That's all I know." That forest troll wanted to cry, but no tears came out. He looked at the maiden in the white veil hat, and didn't dare to move. He was walking on the street, but was knocked down by a stool for no reason, and then dragged into this alley to ask for directions. Who did he offend? Although he couldn't see this maiden's face, she looked thin and weak. However, that stool just now showed him the true meaning of life. Did he dare to move? He really didn't dare to move. All right, you can faint now. Irina stared into that troll's eyes for a while. After making sure that he wasn't lying, she raised the stool in her hand. You're embarrassing your mother, this place. It's quite nice, but why isn't there anyone here? Irina stood in front of Mamie's, and looked at the closed restaurant with a frown. There wasn't a single person in the restaurant, not to mention Meg and Amy. There's no need to wait, Mississippi. I don't know where Boss Mag went to fool around today, but he disappeared without even applying for leave. If you want to eat, then come and line up earlier tonight. The opening hours have already passed. It's already closed, an old man sitting on a bench and basking in the sun reminded kindly as he looked at Irina's back. There was even a hint of resentment in his voice. She queued for more than half an hour this afternoon, and only managed to eat 2 kebabs. Although they were delicious, she still felt a little resentful that she couldn't fill her stomach with delicious food. Fooling around. Irina's gaze turned frosty all of a sudden, and even the surrounding temperature dropped significantly. She turned around slowly, looked at the old man, and asked coldly, "Where is he?" The old man's expression immediately changed. He could already feel the sudden drop in temperature, as well as the terrifying aura emanating from the young woman's body. He said in a trembling voice, I saw Boss Mag enter that alley in the morning. That's not the way back to the restaurant. Why are you so skilled? In the small dark room, Camilla looked at the red rope that was tied up in a strange and ostentatious way. She couldn't help but blink. She had spent so much effort and still couldn't tie up Meg's hands, but he had completely tied her up in the blink of an eye. Nothing else but familiarity, Meg said calmly as he picked up the black whip beside him. He did not have many interests or hobbies, and this was one of them. Of course, this was just the basic model. Looking at the black whip in Meg's hand, Camilla suddenly came back to her senses. The rope on her body was very tight, and her full breasts were squeezed. There was a trace of red on her white, round, and long legs. A slight numbness came from where the rope was tied, and that strange feeling made her want to clamp her legs together. However, the rope tied around her legs forced her legs apart, and she couldn't close them at all. This made her want to struggle. However, this was a high-level spirit-binding rope. Even if she had the strength of a 9th tier, after being tied up, she still couldn't use the magic in her body, let alone break free. A complete rope could affect the whole body. She moved slightly, and the numbness became more intense, as if countless tentacles were sliding over her body. Finally, she couldn't help but let out a cry. This cry was extremely charming, and coupled with Camilla's queen-like aura and her current tied-up appearance, it was even more seductive. Even Meg couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. How could I make such a sound? Camilla's face also turned red, and she felt her mind go blank. She was a pure sadist, how could she get pleasure from being tied up? This was absolutely impossible. Because I've already learned it. Let me go, it's my turn to tie you up. Camilla gave herself a thumbs up for her wit and smoothness. She raised her chin slightly and looked at Meg as she ordered, her queen-like temperament fully displayed at this moment. Ha, stupid bat. Meg sneered in his heart. Looking at the black whip in his hand, he shook his head and said, No, although I don't know why the Countess knocked me out and dragged me here, as a normal person, how can I let you go at this time? If this is the case, I'm afraid I won't be able to walk out of here today, right? I still have to go back and cook for the lovely guests. He had already looked at his watch. After being unconscious for a period of time, he had missed lunchtime perfectly. Anyway, there was nothing to do when he went back now, so he wasn't in a hurry. Holding the whip in his hand, a long-lost feeling surged in his heart, causing the corners of Meg's mouth to curl up slightly. Looking at Camilla's curves under the thick red rope, he smiled and said, "Looks like the Countess likes these little toys." "What a coincidence, I like them too." His smile is so expressive. "Why do I feel a little nervous?" Camilla looked at Meg with a nervous expression, but she quickly comforted herself in her heart. "It's okay, he's just a stupid human. Moreover, a person like him can only be a perverted sadist in the end." "Ha, don't think you can do anything to me just because you tied me up. I'm a genuine sadist. Even if you whip me, I won't make a single sound. And a perverted sadist like you will kneel and lick my feet in the end." Camilla raised her chin and looked at Meg with a mocking expression. "Is being a sadist something to be proud of?" Meg's face darkened. Moreover, how did this fellow determine that he was a sadist? He was clearly a genuine sadist, all right. This didn't seem to be something to be proud of. Actually, every sadist firmly believes that they are a sadist before the whip lands on them. Meg used both hands to straighten the whip in his hand and walked towards Camilla. "Ha, if I make a sound, it'll be my loss." Camilla had a proud expression. "Paw." The black whip landed on her perfectly round and perky buttocks, emitting a clear and melodious sound. A numb feeling spread from the place where the whip landed like an electric current, instantly spreading throughout Camilla's body. Her body started to tremble slightly uncontrollably, and a blush quickly appeared on her face. Her tightly clenched teeth trembled slightly, and in the end, she couldn't help but let out a moan. Woo-woo. Chapter 1052. Camilla's mind was completely blank. That strange and shameful feeling was still being transmitted through her body, making her unable to stop. I actually screamed. So shameful. But this feeling. Why does it feel so good? Camilla's face was so red that it looked like blood could drip out. Her slightly squinted eyes were like silk and her chest was heaving up and down violently. Looking at the man standing in front of her holding the whip, her emotions were in a mess. How is this possible? Why can't I control my body? Anne. Why do I like this feeling a little? Am I really a masochist? No. It can't be like this. Camilla's psychological defenses started to crumble and her view of the world became unstable. Too heavy. Meg looked at Camilla's exaggerated reaction and was a little stunned. He wasn't a pervert. He just wanted to punish Camilla a little so that this countess wouldn't squat on him every day, beat him up, and drag him into a little dark room. After all, she was a level 9 vampire and he was only at the peak of level 7. There was no way he could beat her. As for killing her, he had thought about it before. But she still had a black cat servant who was missing, so she probably knew about this. With Camilla's identity, it was obvious that she wouldn't die silently. Furthermore, the other party didn't show any killing intent toward him at all. What made him even more surprised was that she actually wanted him to understand that he was a masochist pervert so that he would feel inferior in front of Miss Gloria. This kind of strange trick was just a little stupid. Using a whip seems a little too perverted. It doesn't suit my gentle and refined temperament. Meg looked at Camilla, who was exhaling like silk and had a trace of glistening at the corner of her mouth. He suddenly felt a little guilty. He put down the whip in his hand and picked up the candle. Dripping wax was a kind of art. Meg lit the candle with a pious expression and walked towards Camilla. Camilla looked at Mag, who was making his way toward her, and her heart was filled with resistance. However, her body began to tremble uncontrollably, and she couldn't help but imagine what it would feel like to have the crimson wax dripping onto her body. So shameful. But why do I feel a little excited? All that was left in Camilla's eyes was the candlelight, and she swallowed. Camilla, who was tied up with a red rope, and Meg, who was holding a lit red candle, walked towards Camilla. In the dim little black room, everything seemed very charming. Boom! At this moment, the door of the small black room suddenly exploded, turning into countless fragments that blew into the room with a strong gust of wind. Meg blocked it with his hand, and the candle in his hand didn't go out. Looking at the flickering flame, he couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. That doesn't seem to be the focus right now. Meg suddenly thought of something, and a chill swept over him from behind. When he turned around, his eyes widened. At the door, a woman in a long white dress and a white veil hat slowly retracted her leg. It seemed that the thick door had been kicked into pieces by her. Of course, this was not the main point. More importantly, Meg had already recognized who the person was. Even though she was wearing a white veil hat, the long white dress with golden embroidery, and the slender and sexy figure all revealed the person's identity. A woman who shouldn't have appeared here. The #1 strong woman on the Norland continent, the former princess of the elves, and also his wife in name, Amy's mother, Irina. In the dim room, there was a woman tied up with a thick red rope in a shameful way, a man in disheveled clothes, a whip carelessly thrown on the ground, and a lit candle in Meg's hand. Irina's face was as cold as ice, and frost started to spread from the door into the small black room with a deep chill. Irina glanced at Camilla, and her eyes narrowed slightly. She had ridden this bat with big boobs before. She didn't expect that she would dare to steal her man now. Meg's lips moved, and he forced a smile. You might not believe it, but we are just rehearsing the script. Men. Irina glanced at him, and the candlelight became brighter instantly. A drop of red candle liquid flowed down the red candle and landed on his hand. He let out a cry of surprise, and his hand trembled as he threw the red candle away. Even through the veil, Meg could feel Irina's cold face. But this reason, even he didn't dare to believe it. Someone suddenly barged in, and this gave Camilla a shock. She actually let someone see her in this state. If word got out, her reputation would be ruined. If Miss Gloria finds out. Camilla didn't dare to think about it. It was already embarrassing enough to know that she was a masochist. If Gloria found out too, she wouldn't be able to raise her head in front of her. Hey, woman, let me tell you, I am just showing him how to do it. He is my plaything. Don't misunderstand, Camilla said proudly with her chin raised. The spirit-binding rope restrained all her magic, and at the same time, made her unable to detect who the person was. She only vaguely felt a sense of familiarity. Shut up, stupid bat. Irina took out a foldable wooden chair, and with a bang, the chair sent Camilla flying with her mouth wide open. She was embedded into the wall, and just like that, her eyes rolled back and she fainted. Are you worthy of playing with my man? Irina said coldly. Meg looked at the remaining leg of the chair in Irina's hand, and Camilla who was embedded into the wall, and his throat moved. A woman who flipped out was so scary. But is this a crime scene? Meg was a little flustered, and he felt an inexplicable sense of shame as if he was caught red-handed. Wait. Am I not the victim who was knocked unconscious and dragged here? Meg suddenly felt that something wasn't right. Crime scene, but, at the beginning, he was really just a weak and innocent victim. Why are you here? Meg tried his best to naturally shake off the wood shavings in his hair and asked Irina. Alex, you have changed. Irina took off her veil and looked into Meg's eyes. She didn't tear his heart out, but her disappointed gaze made Meg feel even more ashamed. It's not what you think. Meg wanted to explain. You are so slutty. Irina frowned slightly. With a hook of her finger, the black whip on the ground fell into her hand. Meg wanted to run, but when he thought of the difference in strength between him and Irina, he couldn't move his feet at all. The main reason he didn't kneel on the spot was because his legs were frozen. Paw! The sound of the whip landing on the body echoed clearly in the small dark room. Book guest house reading website. Chapter 1053. Paw, paw, paw. The sound echoed in the small dark room, accompanied by shouts that would make one's face turn red. You have indeed changed. Irina threw the whip in her hand to the ground. Looking at Meg, who was covered in whip marks, she let out a sigh of relief, and her tone became a little gentler. Meg, whose face was slightly red, stood up straight. She put down the whip. He was still an unyielding man, and said calmly, "What you see with your eyes is not necessarily the truth. Things are not like what you think. After so many years, don't you know what kind of person I am?" Irina looked at Camilla, who was embedded in the wall, and shook her head. Back then, you could only accept things passively. But now, you've picked up a whip and a candle, and even learned such a complicated binding technique. Whose clothes are you wearing? Meg wanted to cry, but no tears came out. He was obviously also a victim, okay? But I am really innocent. This morning, I went to Dragon Island. When I came back, I felt that someone was following me. I wanted to lure her out, so I turned into an alley. Then, I was knocked out and dragged here. If that is the case, you are still a passive masochist. If you must put it this way, probably. Irina stared at Meg's eyes for a while. Although there was a little helplessness in his eyes, he did not avoid her gaze. It was still as pure as before. Okay, I will give you a chance to prove yourself. Irina pointed at Camilla, who was embedded in the wall. Kill this fucking bat. This is not very good, right? Meg looked at Camilla, who was embedded in the wall in a strange position. Although this countess's brain circuit was a little weird, her actions so far were not enough to be beaten to death. Meg coughed lightly, and said with a wise face, "She is Countess Bartoli. Her position in the vampire tribe is not low. Killing her will definitely cause a lot of trouble. Moreover, she has a black cat servant. Most likely, she knows about this matter, but she is nowhere to be seen now. If this matter is spread out..." "You mean this ugly thing?" Irina went out and threw an unconscious black cat at Meg's feet. Meg, the awkward silence lasted for a while. "Have you eaten yet? Why don't I go back and cook for you?" Meg looked at Irina and said softly. "I don't want noodles. I want steak." Irina's eyes lit up. "Okay, I'll make it for you." Meg nodded, stepped over the black cat, and walked out of the door. Irina glanced at Camilla, who was on the wall, and an ice blade appeared in her hand. However, the ice blade quickly shattered into ice shards on the ground. She put on her veil and turned to walk out of the door. A few 100-years-old virgin. Meg, who was standing at the door, happened to hear Irina's murmur. The corners of his mouth twitched. She was really an old virgin. However, he was relieved that she didn't kill anyone. After all, Camilla was one of the restaurant's regular customers. If she was killed because of a misunderstanding, it was inevitable that he would feel uneasy. The two of them walked in the direction of Amy's. Irina followed behind Meg about 10 meters, neither fast nor slow. Meg found a corner and put on some clothes. The clothes on his body were torn by Irina's whip, so it was easy to think of some strange things. When they reached the magic potion shop, Irina stopped and a trace of surprise flashed through her eyes. Shoot! Meg, who had just walked to the door of the restaurant, quickly made a shushing gesture to Irina. He knew that Irina and Julian were old acquaintances, but he didn't want a third person to know about his relationship with Irina. Irina thought for a while and walked towards the restaurant. Meg breathed a sigh of relief and took out the key to open the restaurant door. It was already 2:00 in the afternoon, so there shouldn't be anyone in the restaurant. Ding-ling, with a soft sound, Meg opened the door. "Mr. Meg." A surprised voice sounded. Before Meg could react, a figure with long golden red hair had already pounced on him. She jumped into his arms and wrapped her long, sexy legs around his waist. Chirp, 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 chirp. Gina was babbling in the fish language. Although Meg couldn't understand her, he could sense her worry from her expression and tone. If it were any other time, Meg would definitely resist for 2 seconds and then accept the concern from his own employee. But now, he could already feel the chill coming from behind him. What day is it today? Why are there so many shurras appearing one after another? Meg wailed in his heart. "Ah, waitress Gina, I'm fine. I didn't get killed. Don't worry about me." Before Irina took out the small chair, Meg removed the bindings on Gina's legs and put some distance between them. The chair that Irina had just taken out was put back by her. His scrutinizing gaze paused on her chest for a while before he narrowed his eyes. It was actually a little bigger than hers. His gaze moved downwards. Because her clothes were short, her flat, snow-white stomach was exposed. There was even a white pearl embedded in her belly button. It was quite alluring. Further down, under the short skirt, were her long, straight legs that were covered in black stockings. Just a waitress. Irina didn't believe him. "Come in first." Meg entered quickly. Of course, it was better to settle family matters at home. "Who is she?" Only then did Gina notice Irina behind Meg. A hint of doubt appeared in her eyes, but she still gave her an innocent smile. She held the door open so that Irina could enter. "Who is she? Why is she in the restaurant?" Irina was also sizing up Gina. She didn't understand a single word that she said just now. It wasn't the common language of the continent, nor did it sound like the language of other species. Gina is a mermaid. She was sent to the restaurant by the teleportation portal. Because she can't leave the sea, Amy temporarily took her in as a waitress in the restaurant. She custom-made a big fish tank for her and is responsible for comforting the customers' children. Meg quickly introduced as soon as they entered. Because of the language barrier, she likes to use body language to express herself. That hug just now is a body language that she often uses to express her welcome and concern. "Hello, I'm Gina." Gina smiled and extended her hand to Irina. She greeted her in the common language of the continent with perfect articulation. "Madam. Can you not slap my face like that?" Meg's expression froze instantly. "Hello." Irina glanced at Meg and smiled coldly. She also extended her hand to gently shake Gina's hand. She. Meg felt his throat dry up. He didn't know how to explain at that moment. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com. Wonderful Book House. .com. Chapter 1054. Gina, you go up and rest first. Meg gestured to Gina. It was better not to drag innocent people into this. He didn't know what would happen now. All right. Gina nodded obediently. Then she waved at Irina, who was wearing a veil, and smilingly said, "Goodbye." It's good that Mr. Meg is fine. If something had happened to him, then Lantist would be hopeless. But who is this woman wearing a veil? She's so mysterious. Could she be Amy's mother? Gina was filled with curiosity as she turned and went upstairs. She's really a mermaid. She almost died of thirst when she first teleported over, Meg said with a smile, pretending to be relaxed. Ha, a mermaid who can spread her legs. Irina sneered. Meg suddenly felt a little guilty, and carefully said, she evolved. After eating the beggar's chicken that I made, she learned to breathe on land. She can also maintain her human form for a longer period of time. Where's Amy? Irina didn't answer Meg's question, and asked instead. Her expression became much gentler at the mention of Amy. Amy went to school at Chaos School. She's learning magic from Magic Master Crassus. Meg quickly replied. His heart tightened. He didn't know what the little fellow had written down in her little notebook. If Irina knew about it, it wouldn't be as simple as kneeling on the washboard today. Irina nodded slightly. She already knew that Amy was learning magic from Crassus. She asked, what about Phyllis? Where did you settle her down? Phyllis is a service staff member in the restaurant. She's in charge of handling the ingredients and learning how to cook from me. She also takes care of Amy occasionally. You've already told her your identity. If you keep her by your side, won't it be easy for others to discover your identity? She doesn't know who I am. Furthermore, her identity has already been cleared. No one should suspect me. Meg shook his head. He was rather confident about this. He looked at Irina and said, however, has the elven issue been settled? Why are you here? Irina sat down on a chair, and calmly said, I have started a revolution in the elven race. All the elves who betrayed the Wind Forest and joined us will become night elves. They will work hard to overthrow the rule of the Wind Forest, abolish the family system, and build a new elven paradise. Overthrow the rule of the Wind Forest. Meg was shocked when he heard Irina's casual words. Irina said it lightly, but the difficulty and danger involved made one's scalp go numb just thinking about it. It was often difficult to succeed in challenging a deeply rooted system without drastic social change as a foundation. I'm hungry. Irina raised her head and looked at Meg, pouting slightly. He didn't complain, nor did he ask too many questions. Meg felt his heart soften when he saw this woman who always maintained the posture of a powerhouse in front of others acting like a spoiled little girl in front of him. I'll go make black pepper steak for you. Take a look at the menu and see if there's anything else you want to eat. I'll make it for you. Meg turned and walked into the kitchen. Oh. Irina responded and flipped through the menu. Meg poured a glass of water and looked at Irina who had just closed the menu. What else do you want to eat? Irina took the glass of water and took a sip. She smiled and said, only children make choices. I want everything. Everything. Meg raised his eyebrows and looked at Irina who couldn't hide the tiredness in her eyes. He nodded and said, okay, I'll make everything for you. Okay. Irina nodded. She put down the glass of water and looked around. She looked in the direction of the stairs and said, you and Xiaomi live upstairs. Yes. Meg nodded. After thinking carefully, he shouldn't have any strange things to pack. He said, if you want to know where Xiaomi lives, you can go upstairs and take a look. I quite like this place. From today onwards, I'm the lady boss. Of course, I want to see where I'm going to live. Irina stood up and walked up the stairs. Lady boss, huh? It seems like I'm lacking one. Meg's mouth revealed a trace of a smile and turned to walk into the kitchen. There was only one customer this afternoon, but it was also the most important one. Irina followed the stairs to the second floor. The floor was paved with soft wooden flooring. The door of the room at the top of the stairs was open. There were all kinds of strange things inside. However, from the size, they should be Xiaomi's toys. They almost occupied the entire room. There was even a swing by the window. He prepared quite a lot of toys for Meg. Irina nodded slightly. She was quite satisfied with this father of hers. As they walked further in, the sound of water ripples could be heard from a room with a half-closed door at the side. Irina looked in through the crack of the door. Her eyes revealed a trace of surprise. In the room, there was a huge crystal fish tank. In the fish tank, Gina's slender legs had turned into a rainbow-colored fishtail. She was blowing bubbles with her eyes closed. On the ground at the side, there was a small mountain of some kind of golden eggshell. Is it really a mermaid? However, why have I never heard of the mermaid race? Is it a type of demon? Irina thought doubtfully in her heart. She couldn't find any information about mermaids in her memory. However, this proved that Meg wasn't lying. There isn't even a hole. Irina turned around and walked to the next room with a relaxed expression. She pushed open the door. It was a very big room. There were 2 pairs of slippers at the door, one big and one small. One was a big bear head, and the other was a small bear head. There was a big bed in the middle of the room. The soft silk quilt made people feel warm. There was a small bed beside the big bed. There was a cute little bear pattern on the sheets. It looked like Amy's bed. Irina pushed open the wardrobe door. It was filled with all kinds of little skirts and clothes. There were only 3 sets of chef's clothes and 2 sets of black men's clothes in the corner of the wardrobe. That's more like it. Irina closed the wardrobe door and finally smiled. She opened her arms and lay back. Her whole body sank into the soft big bed. It's so comfortable, the warm silk quilt exuded a pleasant fragrance. Her tense nerves and tired body were perfectly relaxed at this moment. A black pepper steak was quickly prepared. Meg waited downstairs for a while. Seeing that Irina didn't come down after a long time, he was worried that he might have left something behind. He carefully went upstairs to call her to eat. After pushing open the door, Meg saw Irina sleeping peacefully on the bed. Looks like you've been really tired recently. Meg walked over softly. He leaned over and lifted a corner of the quilt to cover her. At this moment, Irina suddenly opened her eyes. She raised her hand, grabbed his collar, and pulled it down. Chapter 1055. Meg, who was caught off guard, only felt his collar tighten as he was pulled down. That smooth and exquisite face was getting closer and closer. He could clearly see the corners of her lips curling up slightly. Her cherry red lips were full and moist. Her eyelashes were trembling slightly. There was no sun, moon, or stars in her azure blue eyes, only him. At this moment, he felt his heart tremble slightly. Just like that, he allowed himself to fall down and press his lips against hers. Her soft red lips were warm and moist, just like a piece of strawberry-flavored jelly. He couldn't help but want to stick out his tongue and lick it gently. Irina closed her eyes immediately. Her long eyelashes were trembling slightly, and 2 patches of red rose on her cheeks. The hot breath hit her in the face. That warm and hot lips pressed tightly against her. Even her breathing seemed to be taken away in an instant. Her mind was a little muddled. Her body and lips became a little stiff. She didn't know what to do next. Soon, she felt a soft tongue gently glide across her lips. It was like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. A strange numbness instantly spread and scratched her heart like a kitten's claws. Then, when she wasn't paying attention, it slipped into her mouth and unscrupulously seized the breath that belonged to her. This moment of throbbing made everything around them quiet down. Only her uncontrollable moan could be heard. In the battle of tongues, one side was unstoppable, and the other side was utterly defeated. Sucking, lingering, everything was wonderful beyond words. Her slender arms wrapped around his waist tightly. Their bodies were so close together that they could feel each other's heartbeats. After what seemed like a century, Meg slowly opened his eyes. His hands were on the bed. He looked at Irina, whose face was red and whose chest was rising and falling slightly. Her eyes were tightly shut, and her eyelashes were trembling slightly. She was playful and cute. His gaze couldn't help but become gentle. At this moment, he wanted to protect her forever. The throbbing of love was probably like this. The feeling of suffocation gradually dissipated. Irina slowly opened her eyes and met a pair of gentle eyes. She could hear the sound of her heart beating rapidly. After that passionate kiss, she realized that she could still feel her heart beating. Irina's voice had a trace of shyness. She wanted to break the charming silence. Grumble, an untimely stomach growl finished the rest of her words for her. Are you going to eat the steak, or are you going to eat me? Meg's lips curled up with a hint of teasing. You're so coquettish. Irina reached out and pushed him. Me? Come on, let's consider it my loss if you shout once. Meg opened his arms fearlessly. Shameless. Irina snorted in her heart. The door was still open, and there was a bubbling mermaid next door. She still wanted to save face. She nimbly jumped to the ground and turned to walk out of the door. She pretended to be relaxed and said, I'll let you off this time. I'm hungry. I want to eat something delicious. Meg also got up from the bed and followed Irina with a smile on his face. Okay, I'll cook for you. Because of the short entanglement, the black pepper steak was a little cold, so Meg made another serving for Irina. He used a knife to cut open the steaming steak. The red meat juice and red wine flowed out. She put it into her mouth with a fork. After biting into the tender beef, the wonderful taste melted in her mouth. It's so delicious. Irina's eyes narrowed slightly. Her face was slightly red from the alcohol, but her face was full of happiness. Meg also had a smile on his face as he looked at Irina, who was enjoying the steak. At the same time, he calculated the cooking order of each dish in his mind. Tofu pudding, roast beef kebab, Peking duck. The tofu pudding had to be prepared in advance. If he started cooking now, he could serve it as a dessert when she was almost full. This roast beef kebab is so delicious. Give me 5 more of each flavor. The Peking duck is also delicious. Pack 1 for me to take away later. Oh! This Reggiano is so delicious. One dish after another was brought out by Meg. Irina's praise and cries of surprise reverberated throughout the dining room. Even Meg couldn't help but marvel at her appetite. A black pepper steak, 30 roast beef kebab, an entire Peking duck, 2 Reggianos, a spicy grilled fish. This was only the beginning. Phew. I think I'm a little full. Irina put down the drumstick in her hand and heaved a sigh of relief. A satisfied smile appeared on her face. Ever since Phyllis left, she hadn't eaten any cooked food, especially when she was fighting against the aura of death with the Tree of Life. She had relied solely on the Tree of Life to provide her with life energy. The current situation of the Night Elves wasn't optimistic. Just the lack of food was enough to give them a headache. Furthermore, fruits were the most scarce in the forest, and many elves didn't have enough to eat. As the leader, she naturally gave all the food to her clansmen, and had been drinking only due to allay her hunger for many days. Today, she had tasted the most delicious food in the world, and she had eaten until she was full. This feeling was simply too blissful. A warm and comfortable room, endless delicious food, and... Irina looked at Meg's side profile on those sexy lips in the kitchen, and a faint blush appeared on her face as she thought back to that kiss. And I can be with little Amy. This is a place that I don't want to leave. Lastly, there's a bowl of tofu pudding. Sweet or savory? Which one do you want? Meg said with a smile as he brought out 2 bowls of tofu pudding and gently placed them in front of Irina. The fragrance of the tofu pudding wafted over. It was fresh and pleasant, and it relieved the greasy feeling from eating an entire beggar's chicken. Irina looked at the 2 bowls of tofu pudding. The one on the left was drizzled with golden red syrup, and looked sweet and alluring. The one on the right was drizzled with orange-red sauce, and there were pickles and green onions in the middle. Although I want to eat both, I can only eat one now, so I'll choose the sweet one. Irina moved the sweet tofu pudding in front of her, and used a spoon to dig into the tofu pudding that was covered by the golden red syrup. The cut was as white as jade, and it was quickly covered by the sticky syrup. The tofu pudding wrapped in the crystal-clear syrup swayed slightly in the spoon, and it looked as exquisite as a piece of art. It's so beautiful. I didn't expect you to be able to make such beautiful food. No wonder no one doubted you, Irina said with a smile, and then put the tofu pudding into her mouth. The sweet and tender tofu pudding almost melted in her mouth. The syrup wrapped around it was so rich, and the sweetness blended perfectly with the tofu pudding. She couldn't help but close her eyes. After swallowing a mouthful of tofu pudding, she didn't feel the slightest bit of sweetness. There was a faint remnant of the tofu pudding in her mouth, and it was sweet but not greasy. She opened her eyes and stared at the small bowl in front of her. She couldn't help but spoon another spoonful into her mouth. The feeling of bliss was constantly pushed to the peak by spoonful after spoonful of deliciousness. Chapter 1056. Irina put down her spoon, and looked at Meg with a serious expression as she said, "When the war is over, I'll come back to be the owner of the restaurant. I feel like it's much more fun to be able to eat all kinds of delicious food every day than to travel the continent. All right, I'll come and pick you up when the time comes." Meg nodded with a smile before pushing the savory tofu pudding forward as he said, "Actually, you can try the savory tofu pudding, no need. The sweet tofu pudding is clearly the best." Irina immediately turned him down before walking toward the door as she said, "I have to make a trip to the Grey Temple. I'll come back tonight to visit Amy before I leave." Meg opened his mouth, but only said one word in the end. "All right." After Irina disappeared from the restaurant, Meg looked around at the empty restaurant with a hint of loneliness in his heart. Right at this moment, someone knocked on the door. Meg walked over to open the door, and Yabamia, Elizabeth, and Firis' eyes all lit up at the sight of Meg. "Boss, you're back." Yabamia was elated. Elizabeth and Firis also heaved a sigh of relief. "We've searched the entire Chaos City for you, and we thought something had happened to you. Why didn't you say anything before disappearing?" Yabamiya's concern was tinged with a hint of resentment as if she were lecturing a runaway child. Meg could sense everyone's concern, and a warm feeling welled up in his heart. An apologetic smile appeared on his face as he said, "I went out to do something today, and I thought I'd be done before noon. I didn't think I'd be so late, so I didn't inform you in advance. I'm glad you're all right." A smile quickly appeared on Yabamiya's face as she pointed at Firis, and said, "You know, when you weren't here this afternoon, the customers lined up early, and it was Firis's roast beef kebabs that saved the day. They were all full of praise for her. It seems that Phyllis's roast beef kebabs can already stand on their own. This is really good news." Mag looked at Firis with a hint of approval in his eyes. This little maid of Irina's was indeed astonishingly talented in cooking. "Mr. Meg praised me." Phyllis blushed and stuttered, I only learned a little bit of the boss's skills." Why are there so many plates? Did a guest come by?" Yabamiya was a little surprised to see the stacked plates on the table when she entered. There were all kinds of plates, and they were used to hold different dishes. The plates on the table were very complete, and almost all the dishes on the menu had been served. "Oh, I just came back and felt hungry, so I made some food for myself." Meg chuckled as he picked up the savory tofu pudding on the table and took 2 bites. Come to think of it, he was indeed a little hungry. But there's so much food. Yabamiya was still a little perplexed. Meg carried the tofu pudding into the kitchen as he said to Phyllis, "Phyllis, we have to start preparing the ingredients. Most of the customers who came for lunch today are very disgruntled, so it's best to prepare more ingredients for dinner tonight so that more customers can have a good meal." "Oh. All right." Phyllis hurriedly followed Meg into the kitchen and began to prepare the ingredients according to his instructions. "All right, looks like boss really is starving." Yabamiya didn't ask any further questions, and began to clean up the table. In the conference room of the Grey Temple headquarters, a silhouette appeared without a sound. Roland, who was staring at the map on the wall, suddenly turned around and looked at Irina, who had appeared in the conference room. He was a little surprised, and said, "Princess Irina. What are you doing here?" Irina looked at Roland with a smile, and said, "I missed my old friend, so I came to visit." "Can't I?" "Little Gray, we haven't seen each other for 3 years. Don't tell me you don't even recognize me as your old friend." Roland's mouth twitched. If his subordinates heard the nickname Little Gray, they would probably laugh like crazy. It was really not compatible with his identity as the Lord of the Grey Temple, but this person just had to be Princess Irina. Even the city lord had been given the nickname of Iron Muscle by her. What else could he do? "You don't have the time to visit your old friend now, do you? Aren't you afraid that something might happen in the forest when you leave?" Roland said to Irina helplessly. "That old witch Helena and that idiot Borg are busy arguing now. They wouldn't even think that I would leave. Besides, I'm only leaving for a while, so you don't have to worry." Irina waved her hand nonchalantly. "I heard you got an underground cavern from the goblins. Seems like you're serious this time. Seems like the relationship between Chaos City and the goblins is better than I thought. I just got that underground cavern today, and you already know about it. What are you doing here today?" Roland asked Irina, and didn't talk about the goblins. "It's not very convenient for me to go to the Dragon Island, so I'm going to use Chaos City to send a notice." Irina took out the letter she wrote earlier, and tossed it to Roland casually. Roland received the letter, opened it, and read it with a serious expression. After a while, he looked at Irina and said, "Are you sure you want to send this notice?" "Yes. Do you know that if this notice is sent out, both Helena and Borg will definitely point their spears at you? The underground cavern is not an indestructible fortress. I want the world to hear our voice, and let more elves know what we're doing. Resistance by force is expected. Planting the seed of freedom in more elves' hearts is our goal," Irina said with a smile. "As for the result, it's enough to work hard for it." Roland stared at Irina for a long time, and finally put that letter away solemnly. "If there are elves in Chaos City who are willing to go to the underground cavern, I will provide them with the necessary convenience. At least no one can control their choice." "Thank you. I'll ask him to chase you down 2 streets less next time," Irina said with a smile. A green light flashed, and disappeared without a trace. These 2 fellows really don't give in to each other. Roland shook his head, and walked out of the meeting room. After this notice from Irina was sent out, the commotion it caused was not any smaller than the one from Alex in the morning. It was also a piece of news that was enough to shake the Norland continent. "Is father back? Where did he go this afternoon? Should I record this abnormal behavior in my little notebook and tell big sister Irina?" Amy mumbled with a conflicted expression on the way home from school. Book House Reading Website. Chapter 1057. Madam. Are you all right? The black cat used its sharp claws to drag Camilla down from the wall and asked as it undid the spirit-binding rope. Who is that woman? How dare she hit my pretty face with a chair? Ouch. It hurts. Camilla covered her face and complained. I didn't see anything before I was knocked out. The black cat said with some lingering fear. Although it was not very powerful, its perception and speed were comparable to that of a 7th-level magical beast. However, it was knocked out before it could see anything. Although her face was covered, that woman gave me a familiar feeling, like I've seen her somewhere before. Who could she be? And what was the last thing she said? Camilla patted her head, but it was as if she had drunk too much. The only thing she could remember before she fainted was that woman in a white dress and a veil hat and a chair approaching her quickly. Madam, could that woman be here to save Mr. Mac? Maybe he knows something. The black cat said carefully. That guy. Camilla's gaze fell on the red spirit-binding rope on the ground, and her mind immediately recalled the shameful binding and the whip on her body. Why did I have such a big reaction? I'm a noble. How could I have a reaction to a whip? And he's a man, a dirty man. Camilla's heart was in a mess. What happened today had completely overturned her usual style and understanding. The binding that was like a tortoise's shell, the cracking sound of the whip on her body, the bright red candle, all of this seemed to have opened the door to a new world. Madam, are we going to look for him now? The black cat asked carefully. No. Camilla shook her head firmly. I'm a little tired today. I'll settle the score with him tomorrow. The rope had been tied up for a long time, and now she only felt that her legs were sore and weak. She just wanted to go back and lie down. She did not know if that woman was still by Meg's side. It was not that she was afraid of her, but if she went to look for her in this state, she would most likely be knocked out by a chair. That would be too embarrassing. All right. The black cat heaved a sigh of relief. There was a long line at the entrance of Immerse again. The popularity of the leaderboard dominating incident had decreased by quite a bit, but it was still a hot topic. However, compared to the initial one-sided questioning, after many passers-by tried Immerse food, they immediately became Immerse fans. They spontaneously defended and spoke up for Immerse, causing Immerse's reputation to skyrocket. Moreover, after many customers tried the restaurants according to the rankings, they did find some delicacies hidden in the many restaurants. This caused the gourmet rankings, which was originally doubted by many, to rise in popularity. It began to become an important aid for many people to find delicacies. Immerse's high prices made many customers flinch. However, there were still many delicious and inexpensive delicacies on the list that were highly sought after by foodies. On the second floor of Sith Restaurant, the restaurant manager looked at the long line outside the restaurant. He looked a little excited at the skinny middle-aged man dressed in a chef's uniform beside him and said, "Boss, we haven't opened for business yet, but there are already customers lining up outside the restaurant." Moreover, they all specifically ordered freshwater seafood soup. Finally, more customers know about our restaurant. Your insistence on making the best freshwater seafood soup for so many years was not in vain. The river has frozen over these days, so it's not easy to fish for freshwater seafood. Tomorrow, we have to discuss with the fishermen. Even if the price is higher, we have to let them cut through the ice to fish. Otherwise, the customers will definitely be disappointed when they don't get to eat the freshwater seafood soup, the man said with a smile. Boss, if you ask me, we can secretly buy some farmed freshwater seafood. Anyway, the taste won't be too different. The manager lowered his voice and said, cutting through the ice to fish, those fishermen will definitely demand an exorbitant price. If we don't raise the price of the freshwater seafood soup, I'm afraid we will suffer a loss. No, using freshly caught freshwater seafood is our tradition and also our signature. If we use farmed freshwater seafood, wouldn't we be smashing our own signature? We can't do this kind of thing. The boss shook his head decisively. His tone was firm and there was no room for negotiation. The manager opened his mouth and did not mention this matter again. After a while, he said with some indignation, "In order to make this soup, we have been constantly improving and persisting for more than 10 years. What right does that Mamie's have to suppress us? I heard that the dish is not a soup at all. It's just some soup in it. Isn't it obvious that they deliberately raised it to first place? The fact that the freshwater seafood soup can be raised to second place on the rankings shows that the judging this time is quite fair. That Mamie's can dominate the 6 rankings. He must have his own unique points." The boss shook his head and appeared rather indifferent. "If he really has the ability, then so be it. I just can't stand those fellows who rely on underhanded means to get to the top. We almost reached the top." The manager was still unconvinced. He looked at the boss and said, "Boss, let's go challenge Mamie's. Let's take back the first place on the soup rankings fair and square." This matter. The boss was a little hesitant. It would be a lie to say that he did not care at all. After so many years of adhering to this ancestral freshwater seafood soup and constantly researching and improving it, it finally received attention because of the gourmet cuisine rankings. Although there was only a difference of 1 place between second place and first place, it had a completely different meaning. "Father, where did you go this afternoon? Little Amy was so worried about you. Besides, I didn't have anything to eat at noon. Although it's late to eat Sister Bean Sprout's roast beef kebabs, I'm still so hungry." Amy threw herself into Meg's arms as soon as she entered the door. She asked softly with a somewhat scrutinizing gaze. "I went to do something, so I didn't make it back in time. I'll make something delicious for Amy tonight," Meg said with a smile. Okay. Hearing that there was something delicious to eat, Amy's eyes lit up and she nodded her little head. Meg took a look at the long line outside the restaurant, and did not see any trace of Irina. However, it made sense. She had eaten so much in the afternoon, so she shouldn't be hungry now. After the busy evening business hours, Meg waved goodbye to the ladies at the door. He stood at the door and looked around, but did not see any trace of Irina. He couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. "Father, are you waiting for someone?" Amy asked Meg curiously as she hugged Ugly Duckling. "Yes, I'm waiting for someone. She should be here." Meg nodded. Seeing that there was no one around, he turned around and prepared to go in and wait. Apart from Phyllis and Gina, there are many other women. An 8th-tier frost dragon, a 7th-tier elf, a 7th-tier spatial magic caster, a half-dragon, and a little elf are all obediently waiting on you. Should I praise you? A slightly jealous voice sounded from behind. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1058. Meg froze. As a qualified boss, he really only recruited these employees for the sake of the restaurant's benefits and efficiency. Now that he thought about it, they were indeed worthy of praise. However, he only dared to think about that in his heart. There was no other restaurant with such a lineup of service staff in the entire Norland continent, let alone in Chaos City. It was indeed a little strange. And every single one of them was a beautiful young lady. Well, except for Shirley. But to be honest, it was very rare to find a young lady who was prettier than Shirley. As the boss of a restaurant, it wouldn't be right to say that he didn't have any problems recruiting such a batch of service staff. What should I do? I'm anxious. I'm waiting online. Meg's forehead started to sweat. Big sister Irina. Why are you here? I missed you so much. Amy tossed Ugly Duckling aside before jumping into Irina's arms with elation. She struggled to pull her face out of Irina's soft bosom, and looked at her with surprise and elation in her eyes. Irina hugged Amy, and her gaze became gentle. She smiled and said, "Of course I'm here to see Amy. I haven't seen you for 2 months, and you've grown a little taller. Oh, and you've become prettier too. You're like me in this aspect." "Really? Then, will Amy be as pretty as big sister Irina when she grows up?" Amy asked in surprise. "No, there will only be one as pretty as me." Irina shook her head. "Ha!" Amy widened her eyes and felt that her young heart had been hurt. Meg also raised his eyebrows. He didn't expect her to be so mean to Amy. Irina also felt Amy's hurt. She thought for a while, and comforted her with a smile. "It's all right. Although you're not as pretty as me, you'll still be prettier than the others." That's good. Then, when I grow up, big sister Irina will be old. I'll still be the prettiest." Amy smiled again. Irina stared. She didn't expect the little fellow to hold on to the sharp blade of age and stab her in the back. She is indeed his biological daughter. Looking at the two who were hurting each other, Meg's lips curled into a smile, giving off a different kind of warmth. "It's cold outside, come in and have a seat." Meg opened the door and said with a smile. Irina carried Amy into the house. Ugly Duckling looked at Irina in a cowardly manner. It wanted to go up to her, but it was too scared to move. The door of the restaurant closed, shutting out the cold as well. "Are you hungry? Do you want something to eat?" Meg looked at Irina and asked. Irina thought for a moment and said, "I want to eat grilled fish, beef kebabs, and a beggar's chicken. That's about it for now." "Okay." Meg nodded and turned to walk into the kitchen. Father only asked big sister Irina if she wants to eat, and didn't even ask Amy if she wants to eat. I'm no longer your little baby. You don't love me anymore." Amy pouted and said aggrievedly. Meg turned around and looked at the jealous little fellow. He smiled and asked, "Then, Amy, do you want to eat supper? Father will make whatever you want to eat." Amy smiled and hugged Irina's arm as she happily said, "I want to eat the same as big sister Irina. I want to eat with her." "Good girl." Irina pinched Amy's face. "Okay, I'll make it for you." Meg nodded and walked into the kitchen. Once Meg entered the kitchen, Irina was already looking at Amy with a smile. "Amy, in the 2 months that we haven't met, did your father sleep with other big sisters? Kiss them? Hugging? Or suddenly disappear in the middle of the night? Strange noises coming from next door? Did he receive any strange letters?" Amy ran to the counter and took out a little black book as she said with a smile, "About that, I have a little notebook that records everything, a beautiful and generous mother and cute daughter flipping through a little black book together." The scene of a loving mother and a filial daughter was so warm and beautiful. But Meg, who was in the kitchen, saw this scene and even his hand that was holding the kitchen knife trembled slightly. The book in Amy's hand was the real death note. He didn't know what the little fellow had recorded in it, but before he could check it, it had already fallen into Irina's hands. This time. "I'm probably dead, right?" Meg lamented in his heart. It was all his fault that he didn't expect Irina to suddenly come. He didn't have time to bribe Amy and was really caught off guard. "What are you looking at? Let's eat the grilled fish first." Meg came out with the grilled fish and pretended that he didn't know anything. He secretly glanced at Amy's little notebook from the corner of his eyes. He had to make some preparations in advance and try to get as round as possible. It smells so good. Irina closed the book. Unexpectedly, she didn't fall out with him on the spot. There was even a hint of a smile at the corner of her mouth. Fuck. That's too scary, right? Could it be that she's preparing some big move? Or is she going to finish this meal before sending me on my way? Meg blinked and looked at Irina, who casually picked up a piece of fish with her chopsticks and put it in Amy's bowl. He couldn't figure out what was going on, and his heart was in a panic. This wasn't as good as a direct storm. At least he didn't need to be so nervous. You're not eating? Irina asked curiously as she took a bite of the fish and looked at Meg, who was standing awkwardly by the table. Yes, father. You should eat too. Amy sucked a strand of vermicelli into her mouth and swayed her body happily. Okay. Meg sat down beside Amy a little cautiously and looked at the mother and daughter who were happily eating. He didn't know what they were up to, so he simply steeled himself and picked up his chopsticks to eat the grilled fish. Forget it. Even if I'm going to die, I'll eat my fill before I go on my way. After eating the grilled fish, Meg went to grill a bunch of beef kebabs. Irina picked up a beef kebab and took a bite. She looked up at Meg and said, I want a drink. Okay. Meg went into the kitchen and came out with 2 large glasses of beer. He placed one in front of Irina and the other in front of himself. After coming to this world, he rarely drank, but he wanted to drink a few glasses with her tonight. The spicy and delicious grilled beef kebab paired with the cold beer was finished in just a few bites. The large glass of beer was also finished in just a few mouthfuls, leaving only a little foam hanging on the sides of the glass. Then, it was quickly refilled. After downing 3 large mugs of beer in a row, Irina's cheeks were already a little flushed. She raised her mug to the light, and a joyful smile appeared on her face as she looked at the translucent amber beer. This beer is so delicious, it's perfect when paired with this kebab. Meg looked at the drunk Irina and smiled. He clinked his glass with hers and said softly, Cheers. Cheers. Irina picked up her glass and finished it in a few mouthfuls. She then asked Meg to refill her glass. After drinking countless glasses, the drunk Irina finally fell asleep on the table. Amy also fell asleep on her lap. Phew, she's finally drunk. Meg breathed a sigh of relief. Even with his alcohol tolerance, he still felt a little dizzy when he stood up after drinking so much beer. But, what should I do now? Where should she sleep? Meg looked at the drunk Irina and felt a headache coming on. He thought for a long time. It shouldn't be a problem if we sleep together, right? Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1059. Meg carried Amy and Irina upstairs. Because the little one kept hugging her hand, he thought for a while and decided not to separate them. Instead, he put them on the big bed. Looking at Irina, who was hugging Amy naturally and smiling contentedly, Meg's lips curled into a smile. His mood suddenly became very peaceful. In this small room, the combination of the family of 3 made him feel inexplicably at ease. However, he knew that this scene could only last for one night at most. Since Irina had already embarked on the path of rebelling against the wind forest, she had to continue on this path. He was still far from being able to shelter her from the wind and rain, and he couldn't say anything to make her stay. System, if I need your help to overthrow the wind forest's rule, how much would it cost? Meg asked silently in his heart. Even if I sold you, it wouldn't be enough, the system said disdainfully. Meg raised his eyebrows. He was just asking casually. The system seemed to have many restrictions when it came to helping. He definitely couldn't do something that would affect the entire continent. After looking at the bed for a while and tucking in the corner of the blanket, Meg turned around, went downstairs, and went into the kitchen to get busy. An hour later, Meg placed a large lunchbox on the first table by the stairs. Then, he wrote a piece of paper and stuck it on it. Meg took a shower and changed into a set of pajamas. Looking at the bottle of perfume in the corner, he hesitated for a while before picking it up. Amy is my daughter, and Irina is Amy's mother. If that's the case, it shouldn't be a problem for me to sleep on this bed, right? There are only 2 beds in this room. The small bed is too short, and I can't even fit my legs. The big bed is the only choice. Moreover, this is my house, my bed. Meg stood by the bed and muttered with some hesitation. Meow, Ugly Duckling, who couldn't climb onto the bed, stood by Meg's feet and looked up at him pitifully. All right, Ugly Duckling, you sleep on the small bed, and I'll sleep on the big bed. That's settled. Meg immediately made a decision. He grabbed Ugly Duckling and put it on the small bed, while he lay down on the edge of the big bed about half a meter away from Irina. This is the first time I feel that going to bed is such an exciting thing. Meg was as straight as a salted fish as he stared at the ceiling. He could feel the figure lying not far away from him, and his little heart was thumping rapidly. Meg took a deep breath to adjust his emotions and tried to calm himself down. Although he wasn't an innocent virgin, he was still lying on the bed. He was a saint. After a while, Meg, who still didn't feel sleepy, couldn't help but turn his head sideways to look at Irina. A ray of light shone in from the window. The soft silk quilt made an alluring curve with her breasts. Her perky nose, cherry lips, and side profile were still very attractive. Meg looked at her quietly. His mood gradually calmed down, and then he started to feel a little sleepy. However, just as he was about to close his eyes, Irina, who had already fallen asleep, suddenly opened her eyes and turned to look at him. Do I look good? Yes. Yes, Meg answered almost instinctively. Then, he realized why she suddenly woke up from her drunken stupor. Before he could do anything, Irina suddenly reached over and pulled him into her arms. Feeling the softness and warmth on his face, and the body that was pressed against him, Meg was a little confused. What's going on? He looked up at Irina again. Her eyes were closed, and she seemed to have fallen asleep again. Her breathing was steady and peaceful. If he hadn't been pulled over just now, and the softness and comfort of his pillow was real and had a pleasant fragrance, he would have thought that he was hallucinating. Was it an unconscious action? Meg thought with some doubts. Irina's arm was still on his body, holding him in her arms. He, who was just envious of Amy, now received the same benefit of a chest pillow. Since he was already here, he might as well make the best of it. Meg closed his eyes comfortably, found a comfortable angle, and fell asleep peacefully. That's right, this is the right posture for an experienced driver. Those who pretend to squirm uneasily are really perverts. Hugging one on each side, I'm indeed the biggest winner. Irina's lips curled into a smile. Hugging Amy and Meg on each side, she also fell asleep. In the middle of the night, Irina suddenly opened her eyes and looked at the sky outside the window. She looked at the 2 people sleeping peacefully in her arms with some reluctance. She lowered her head and gently kissed Amy's forehead. She stared at Meg's face for a while, then kissed him on the lips with a slightly red face. She gently let go of the 2 of them and appeared beside the bed in a flash. I think I'll be able to defeat those guys soon and come back to be with you guys, Irina said softly. Then, she resolutely turned around and left. Her figure disappeared at the door. Meg, who was sound asleep, slowly opened his eyes. He secretly clenched his fists and whispered, I'll come and find you. Soon, very soon. Irina went downstairs and immediately saw the big box on the table by the stairs. There was a piece of paper on the box with a short sentence written on it, take it with you to eat on the way. What's wrong with this guy? Irina burst out laughing, but there were tears in the corners of her eyes. Wait for me to come back. If anyone dares to flirt with other girls, I'll beat them all to death. Early the next morning, Meg looked at the line of words written on the note on the table, and his eyelids couldn't help but twitch. Was it his fault for having a face that made people want to commit crimes? But for some reason, he still carefully put the note away. Just as he was about to put it on the counter, he found Amy's little notebook. What kind of bad things did she write in there? Why didn't she get angry after reading it? Meg curiously picked up the little notebook and secretly flipped through it. This morning, Father made me delicious rainbow fried rice. For lunch, we had steak and roast beef kebabs. For dinner, we had super spicy grilled fish. I had a lot of fun eating today. Today, Father made delicious braised pork with soy sauce and helped a poor grandpa to draw for him to find his lost child. If I'm lost, Father will draw me very well, right? Yes, of course. After all, I'm so good-looking. Today, a mermaid sister suddenly appeared in the dining hall. She fainted before she could say anything. Father and I carried her upstairs to the bathtub. Father added a lot of sea salt to the water so that she could survive. She drank so much salt water. If she were to be made into a grilled mermaid, would there be no need to add salt? Chapter 1060. Ugly Duckling has gotten fatter again. There's so much meat on its tummy now. Although it feels nice to touch, I think we should be able to eat our own roast duck if it continues to grow like this. This is my daughter. Meg looked at the diary in his hands, and was so touched that he was about to cry. He finally understood why Irina didn't have any reaction after reading the diary yesterday, and was even quite nice to him. How was this a death note? This was a diary of a foodie through and through. Furthermore, the little fellow had successfully molded him into a kind and principled man. All right, I'll add an extra egg for breakfast today, and I'll arrange for whatever she wants to eat in the future. It's not too much to spoil such a precious daughter, Meg muttered to himself with a smile as he put the little black diary back into the cupboard. Did big sister Irina and father sleep together yesterday? Then, how should I write it down today? Amy opened her eyes and looked at the little bird made of grass and the big empty bed. She thought for a while, but soon shook her head. Forget it. Let's think about what to eat for breakfast. Should it be rainbow fried rice or braised chicken and rice? Early in the morning, a notice posted outside the 8 city gates of Chaos City quickly attracted the attention of the residents, and then spread to all parts of the Norland continent rapidly. I, Irina. In the name of freedom, I've formed the Night Elves. I'm determined to overthrow the rule of the Wind Forest family, and build a real elven paradise. I won't give up until I achieve my goal. The notice didn't have many words, but it was like a stone that caused 1,000 ripples. The discord in the elven race had been spreading for a long time. It started after Princess Irina was deposed. However, no one expected Princess Irina to suddenly announce the formation of a new organization, the Night Elves, and was determined to overthrow the current rule of the elven race. She even announced it in Chaos City and to the whole continent. And it was only a day after Alex's response. In just 2 days, 3 things happened that shook the entire continent, and made many people think of the relationship between Alex and Irina. A few years ago, as long as one of them was mentioned, people would inevitably think of the other. They could be said to be the representatives of toughness. There was no place on the Norland continent that they didn't dare to go, and no one that they didn't dare to beat up. The 2 level 10 pinnacle masters, the god of swords Alex with unparalleled swordsmanship, and the goddess Irina with heaven-defying magic, had finally returned. Although the 2 of them did not form a team this time, once the news spread, it still shook the entire continent. In a large hall in the Wind Forest, Borg looked at the letter he had just received with a stiff expression. He kicked the table in front of him, and angrily said, "That bitch Irina, how dare she come to Chaos City and say that she's going to defeat us? Gather the troops. Today, I will personally destroy her and those traitors. My lord, the High Priestess is watching us. I'm afraid it's not appropriate to send troops." An elf said hesitantly. "Shut up. That old witch Helena must also want to kill Irina right now." Borg gritted his teeth with a cold smile and said, "This is the eve of the signing of the peace treaty. If we don't destroy these traitors as soon as possible, the elves will be at a disadvantage in the negotiations. That old witch will definitely not let that happen." In the starry cave, Helena was also looking at the letter in her hand. A ball of blue flame rose up and burned the letter into white ashes. "Irina, I thought you were a smart person, but it seems like I was wrong. Your stupidity is incurable." Helena looked at the brightest star in the cave with furrowed brows, and said, "Since that's the case, for the sake of the elves' interests and future, I have no choice but to kill you. If the queen can still come out of seclusion, I believe she will also understand me." The three big powers of Chaos City gathered again. Roland's brows furrowed, and said, "What should we do this time? The elves are already in a mess internally. The peace treaty has not started yet, and it has already become an unstable factor. Isn't that a good thing? The internal chaos will take away most of their energy. Once they are unable to destroy this rebellion quickly, they won't be able to make any strong demands in the peace treaty," Michael said with a smile. "Yes. With Princess Irina's ability, Alex's support, and the complex underground caverns provided by the goblins, the elves should be able to continue this rebellion for some time. There might even be a chance of success. This isn't a bad thing." Novin nodded with a smile. "Now that you put it that way, it does make sense." Roland thought about it carefully, and nodded slightly. "Since that's the case, we have to do something to make Irina's night elves last a little longer. As long as the elves in Chaos City are willing to join the night elves, we will let them go to the underground caverns. At the same time, we will send them some rations and battle supplies through the goblins. At least, we can ensure that they won't be destroyed easily. Won't this make us weaker? If it comes to the time when even Chaos City needs to join the battle, this little increase in strength won't matter anymore. The leader of the night elves is carrying such a heavy burden on her shoulders. This woman is really big-hearted," Meg mumbled to himself helplessly after hearing about the contents of the announcement. She didn't mention anything about doing such a big thing to him last night. It seemed like she didn't want him to be involved in this. However, with his ability, he really couldn't help her much now. If his identity was exposed, he would become a target for everyone, and become a burden instead. Night elves. The princess. She's fine. And she wants to overthrow the rule of the forest. Phyrus rushed to the city gate immediately after hearing the news. Her eyes reddened when she saw the announcement, and she was so agitated that even her body was trembling slightly. This was the first time she heard about the princess after coming to Chaos City. The princess must need me very much now. Without me, she might not be able to eat her fill. I have to go back to her side. Phyrus' gaze quickly became determined, and she turned to walk towards the restaurant. "Mr. Meg, I'm sorry. I might have to resign," Phyrus said to Meg, who was putting on an apron, as soon as she entered. "Resign? Phyrus, what's wrong with you? Why are you resigning all of a sudden?" Meg looked at Phyrus with surprise. They got along quite well during this period of time. Although this last didn't like to talk, she was efficient and a fast learner. At this speed, she would be able to become a chef on her own very soon. "Actually, there's something I haven't told you." Phyrus looked at Meg with a hint of hesitation. Chapter 1061. Meg looked at Phyllis and suddenly panicked. Could this last be? Actually, I am the elven princess maidservant. She needs me now, so I have to go to her side and help her. Phyllis looked at Meg with a determined expression. Meg raised his eyebrows. Luckily, it wasn't what he thought. Looking at the apologetic Phyllis, he wanted to laugh in his heart. He was the one who brought this maiden to Chaos City, and now she was feeling guilty because she didn't reveal her identity. However, it seemed like Phyllis had seen the announcement, and that was why she was so anxious to resign and return to Irina's side. She knew the danger, but she didn't hesitate at all. Meg was touched by her loyalty. The Night Elves' current situation wasn't optimistic. A rebel team that was put together in a short period of time, and most of them were slave elves with lower power, wanted to overthrow the deep-rooted and powerful the Wind Forest. It was no different from ants trying to shake a tree. I have heard some things about the elves and Princess Irina. If you insist on returning to her side to help her, I won't stop you. Meg looked at Phyllis. Irina indeed needed someone who could take care of her. However, before you leave, I want you to think about 2 questions. Do you know where to find the princess? If you really find her, how can you help her, or be a burden? Phyllis opened her mouth. She thought for a while, and then shook her head dejectedly. The princess is definitely not in the Wind Forest anymore. I don't know where to find her either. However, I think I can take care of her. She doesn't know how to cook, but she is a little picky when it comes to food. She would rather starve than eat something she isn't used to. Meg thought back to how Irina had finished the entire menu on her own the previous afternoon, and he was feeling rather disgruntled. Phyrus was clearly right, she most likely hadn't had a proper meal by herself in a very long time. If you want to take care of her, or play a role in the rebel army, I think you should learn faster and more cooking techniques and dishes. The dishes you cooked in the past were too delicate. You only ate 1 bite of each dish, which was not suitable to provide enough energy for the soldiers during wartime. If you want, I can teach you how to make yongzhou fried rice and laji rujiamo. During this time, I will also help you find out the princess's location. As long as you can confirm their location and ensure their safety, you can go there at any time. Meg looked at Phyllis seriously. How could he not feel sorry for the mother of his child? If it weren't for the fact that the situation didn't allow it, he would have gone to the front lines to cook for her. Although Phyllis was an excellent cook, if she was willing to cook for Irina, he would feel more at ease. Naturally, he would not force her to stay. Mr. Meg. Phyllis looked at Meg with tears in her eyes. He was so nice to her that he was willing to do so many things for her. No one had ever treated her like this except for the princess. Seeing the tears in Phyllis's eyes, Meg thought that he had been too harsh. He quickly said, "If you are in a hurry to leave now, I can go to the mayor's mansion and ask. Maybe they have some information." "No, Mr. Meg, you are right. I should become a useful person, not a burden to the princess, like last time when she was worried about my safety, but it was useless." Phyllis shook her head and looked at Meg firmly. "Please teach me how to cook." A smile appeared on Meg's face. He nodded and said, "Okay, then let's start with this morning's break. I will teach you how to make yongzhou fried rice." "Okay." Phyllis nodded hard. "Mr. Meg, I may have to resign. If I leave this time, I hope you can help me take care of Anna for a while. If I can't come back, I hope you can help me take good care of her." Shirley also came to the restaurant earlier than usual. She glanced at Anna, who was playing with Ugly Duckling with Amy outside the restaurant, and said to Meg with a serious expression, "You are leaving too?" Meg raised his eyebrows. He was surprised, but also within his expectations. Shirley and Sally were both nobles in the elven race. Meg knew that very well. However, they were different from those elves who had a rigid mindset and social class structure. They had fought for the freedom of the lower-class elves. Shirley even took Anna in. Irina's announcement was actually a call to arms for the elves who were roaming the Norland continent. Fight for freedom. What a noble and true goal. The elves who had been persecuted for many years and yearned for freedom would probably be fired up when they saw this announcement. Yes. My brethren need me. Shirley nodded without any hesitation. Meg looked at Shirley. This elf who was prettier than most women was gradually becoming more important in his heart. You can leave any time. I will take care of Anna. She will have whatever Amy has. Meg nodded. Thank you. A smile appeared on Shirley's face. She looked around the restaurant and said, I'll bid my farewells here. As for the others, please say goodbye for me. Meg looked at Shirley and nodded slightly. I'll bid my farewells here. Take care. Shirley turned and walked out of the door. Meg looked outside. Shirley squatted down and hugged Anna clumsily. She whispered a few words into her ear before getting up and leaving. The little girl's eyes were red as she clutched the corner of her shirt tightly. I will come back after the war ends. I will still take care of you then. Shirley turned back and smiled at Anna. Anna looked at Shirley. Her nose twitched, and she extended her pinky. Pinky promise. You must come back. Okay. Shirley extended her pinky and hooked it with Anna's pinky. Pinky promise. 100 years. Don't change your mind, Anna said seriously. Shirley retracted her hand, raised her delicate chin, and said with a smile, Don't worry. A beautiful person like me won't lie. With that, she turned and strode away, waving her hand with her back facing the restaurant. Anna looked at Shirley's back and started sobbing. What's going on? Why is there such a strong sandstorm today? Shirley blinked. She quickened her pace and soon disappeared from the square. It's okay, Miss Anna. You still have us. Amy walked over and hugged Anna gently. She reached out to wipe away the tears on her face, and said with a smile, I heard that good-looking people don't die easily. Miss Shirley is so good-looking. You won't die easily. Chapter 1062. In the Elven Embassy, Yngve closed the door. He looked at Shirley agitatedly and said, Young Master Blower, are you sure you want to join the rebels? Once this gets out, the chief will definitely cut ties with you in order to protect the Billy family. You will lose all your support. Although Princess Irina is very powerful, she can't change anything with a bunch of weak slaves. Shirley looked at Yngve calmly and said, I'm just here to bid you farewell. Thank you for taking care of me during this period of time. I'm leaving now. Yngve looked at Shirley, who was about to open the door, and said with a frown, The chief sent me a secret letter last night, and asked me to send you back. Do you think they're doing the right thing? Shirley asked without turning back. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I know you'll die if you go, Yngve said. I know, you know. Shirley opened the door, and the sunlight shone on her, making her look very radiant. I'll try my best not to die. Shirley smiled and strode out. Yngve raised his wand and put it down slowly. In the end, he sighed heavily. If I were 100 years younger, I would be on my way now. Freedom, the aura of youth. Take good care of the child. If I don't come back this time, tell her that her father died for freedom. This is the soul of us elves. A middle-aged elf tied a bag on his body and gently kissed the little elf who was still sleeping. He looked at the red-eyed female elf and said. The female elf hugged him tightly, and said with red eyes, "Come back alive. The child and I will wait for you." The elf hugged her tightly, and whispered into her ear, "Take good care of yourself. If I don't come back, don't suffer. Find a good person and continue living." "No, I'll only wait for you." She shook her head vigorously, and her tone was very firm. The same thing happened in every corner of Chaos City. Some of them were high-ranking commanders in the Grey Temple and the City Lord's castle, some were shop owners in Aiden Square, and some were just workers in small workshops in the south of the city. However, because of a notice, they left everything behind, carried their backpacks, bows, and arrows, and embarked on the journey to the Wind Forest. He left the Wind Forest because he didn't like the system that restricted his freedom. Now that Princess Irene had raised the banner of resistance, they were willing to go through fire and water for the sake of the forest in their memories. In the restaurant, Meg looked at the people who had already arrived and tried his best to say calmly, "Shirley has left. She asked me to say goodbye to everyone. She will come back." Anna, whose eyes were still red, whispered, "Why is she like Sally? She left without saying a word." Yabamiya said dejectedly. The rest of the people were also in low spirits. During this period of time, everyone got along well and cooperated well with each other at work. Shirley's sudden departure made them somewhat reluctant. "All right, let's have breakfast first, and then get ready to open for business." Meg stroked Anna's head with a smile. He looked at Elizabeth and said, "Elizabeth, after Shirley leaves, you need to take over the cleaning duties. Can you do it?" Elizabeth nodded without much change in her expression. "Then, I'll have to trouble you." Meg nodded. With Elizabeth's 8th tier power, it was naturally a waste for her to do some cleaning duties. "I have to express my feelings to Miss Shirley today. I hope this diamond ring can let her understand my feelings." Constantine stood at the front of the line with an exquisite little box in his hand. He thought to himself nervously as he stuck his head out to look into the restaurant. Although Miss Shirley didn't show any interest in him during this period of time, he was able to see her every day, and at least he was familiar with her. The torment of missing her day and night made his heart go up and down like a roller coaster. He couldn't continue living like this. Today, he had to express his feelings to Shirley. Regardless of whether he was accepted or rejected, he wanted a result, and not an illusory hope. While waiting anxiously, the restaurant's door opened slowly as usual. Mr. Mack stood at the door and said to everyone with a smile, "Good morning. Welcome to Mamie's." The restaurant's waiters stood on both sides of the aisle. Constantine tidied his clothes and looked into the door. There were many familiar faces, but Shirley wasn't among them. "She's not here." Constantine was stunned. The crowd walked in, and he followed the crowd into the restaurant. He looked around, including the kitchen, but he still didn't see Shirley. "Mr. Mack, where's Miss Shirley? Why isn't she here today? Did she apply for leave?" Constantine asked nervously as he pulled Meg, who was about to walk into the kitchen. "She resigned. She's already left." Meg looked at Constantine. This man who insisted on coming to the restaurant to fawn on Shirley every day could be considered a regular at the restaurant. Resigned and left. Constantine's expression changed. The exquisite wooden box in his hand fell to the ground, and a purplish gold gemstone ring fell out of the box. The dazzling gemstone was divided by countless facets and shone brilliantly. Constantine, who was stunned for a while, didn't care about the gemstone ring. He grabbed onto Meg as if he was grabbing onto his last life-saving straw, and nervously asked, Then do you know where she went?" "She didn't say, but she should have left Chaos City by now." Meg shook his head. "She's already left." Constantine seemed to have lost all his energy. He let go of Meg's hand, and walked out of the door despondently. For some people, the moment they turned around, it became an eternal farewell. He suddenly regretted it. If only he could muster his courage yesterday. Even if he was rejected. He was also a man who had countless women chasing after him. He was rich and glamorous. But in front of her, he was like a chaser of the light, hiding humbly in the shadows. Meg picked up the ring on the ground. When he looked up again, Constantine had already disappeared at the door. Although I can't give him my blessings, I can't say anything either. Not knowing is still considered lucky. Meg looked at the ring in his hand, and carefully put it back into the small box. I'll return it to him next time. He's probably not in a good mood today. After the breakfast service, Meg began to teach Fyrus how to make Yongzhou fried rice. The order of cooking, the control of the fire, the stir-frying technique. If one were to examine it carefully, this was actually not a simple fried rice dish. Fortunately, Fyrus was indeed quite talented, and she liked to stand at the side and watch Meg cook, so she quickly got the hang of it. System, I want to draw a prize. Meg lay on the deck chair at the restaurant's entrance, basking in the sun as he tapped on the big prize wheel. The past 2 days had been so exciting that he almost forgot that he still had 2 prizes to draw. Chapter 1063. In view of the host's serious and perfect completion of the system mission with a good attitude, the high-level recipe library will be opened to the God of Cookery Advanced Lottery. The host has a certain chance of drawing a high-level dish. You have 2 chances to draw. Please prepare to draw. The system's voice sounded, and the names of dishes flashed on the big red wheel. It was not like before, where each grid had a fixed name. It looked rather strange. High-level dish. What's that? Meg could not help but ask curiously. This was the first time he had heard of such a thing. Could it be that the recipes given to him by the system before were only low-level dishes? There is no difference between good and bad food, but in this world, the effects it can bring to the consumer are different. Yongzhou fried rice has a certain refreshing and recovery effect. Its effect is similar to recovery potion. Its effect is low-level. Tofu pudding has the effect of beautifying and removing scars. For women, it is no different from giving a new life. Its effect is mid-level. Beggar's chicken has a certain chance of giving seafood the ability to breathe on land. Its effect can be considered high-level. However, because the target audience is small and there is a certain coincidence, it can only be considered mid-level. As for those dishes that have left a deep mark in the history of food and have a strong effect on most consumers, they are called high-level dishes. The system replied. There's such a thing. Could this be the legendary indigo root? Meg raised his eyebrows thoughtfully. The system's grading was very simple. It graded dishes according to their effects. The more advanced the function, the higher the grade. It was very clear. However, this grading was actually different from person to person. For example, Rigiamo should be a high-level dish for the Burning Legion. For ordinary people, eating it would only increase their vitality and would not have such a big effect. High-level dishes that had a strong effect on everyone really made people look forward to it. Meg's face revealed a look of anticipation. He rubbed his hands and was ready to open the big wheel. Host, don't be too excited. This time, only a small number of high-level dishes are available. The probability of the host drawing a high-level recipe is 3%. The system quickly poured a bucket of cold water over him. Damn. Meg immediately sobered up. After thinking for a while, he asked, System, what's the probability of thank you for your patronage? 30%. System, what the fuck? What the fuck? Bounce. Rebound. Meg rubbed the space between his eyebrows. The chances of getting a "thank you for your patronage" were 100 times higher than getting a high-grade recipe. This was simply depressing. After taking 2 deep breaths to calm down, Meg looked at the big wheel and touched the start button with his consciousness. The red roulette wheel spun crazily, and the words in the empty space on the roulette wheel flashed crazily. What could it be? Meg watched nervously. The speed of the turntable gradually slowed down, and the words on the turntable became clearer. The names of the dishes appeared on the turntable one after another. Fried pork tenderloin, big plate chicken, roasted donkey meat, pork stewed with vermicelli. Meg couldn't help but gulp just by looking at it. The names of the dishes were so familiar. Just thinking about them made her salivate. However, the blank spaces in between made him a little scared. There were too many blank spaces. If he landed on a blank space, then all the hard work he had done before would have been for nothing. The wheel slowly stopped under Meg's intense gaze. Youtiao and soybean milk set meal. Meg blinked. After making sure he didn't see wrongly, he asked tentatively, "System, is this a high-grade recipe?" "This is the first time I've seen a set meal." "No, it's not." The system answered calmly. "Youtiao and soybean milk." "I'm really unlucky." Meg sighed. Looking at the other recipes on the roulette wheel, he felt a little complicated. No matter how he looked at it, the youtiao and soybean milk set meal was the simplest and lowest grade among the recipes on the roulette wheel. Moreover, he didn't really like eating youtiao. The oil that was used repeatedly was a little unclean in his opinion. Besides, it tasted greasy. When it was just taken out of the pot, it was hot to the mouth. After a while, it became cold and hard to chew. However, if it was boiled in the hot pot, he could eat a few. The youtiao was boiled casually in the boiling hot pot and then picked up immediately. The texture was not bad. He liked the soybean milk, but it was only freshly ground. "System, what's the effect of the soybean milk and youtiao?" Meg didn't give up and asked. "Host, please figure it out by yourself," the system answered coldly. "Alright, I'll just take it as filling the gap for breakfast." It's indeed a little strange to eat fried rice for breakfast every day. Moreover, the youtiao and soybean milk produced by the system should be different. Meg comforted himself in his heart. Although he was a little upset that he didn't draw a high-grade dish, it was still good enough that he didn't draw a "thank you for your patronage." There's still one last chance. If I can't rely on money to solve the problem, it will indeed become more exciting. Meg let out a breath and pressed the start button again. The roulette wheel spun crazily. The names of the dishes flashed by one after another, dazzling him. Meg clenched his fist subconsciously and held his breath as he looked at the roulette wheel. The roulette wheel gradually slowed down and finally came to a stop. Ding! Congratulations to the host for drawing a high-grade recipe. Buddha jumps over the wall. Damn! Meg sat up immediately and looked at the recipe that had the words "Buddha jumps over the wall" written in golden light in his mind. Compared to the usual golden light, there was a hint of red in the light, making it even more dazzling. "System, is this Buddha jumps over the wall really a high-grade recipe?" Meg blinked his eyes and asked with uncertainty. Although his luck had always been good, it was only a 3% chance after all. When he really drew it, he felt that it was unreal. Buddha jumps over the wall is also known as full jar of incense and fortune, longevity, and integrity. It's a famous local dish in Fuzhou, Fujian. It belongs to the Fujian cuisine. It got its name because of the saying, "When the jar of incense was opened, the aroma of meat spread all around." When Buddha heard it, he abandoned Zen and jumped over the wall. According to legend, it was developed by the owner of Fuzhou's Juchuan Garden restaurant, Xingchuanfa, during the Qing dynasty. As one of the representative dishes of the Fujian cuisine, the deliciousness of Buddha jumps over the wall is widely recognized. It also has an extremely high position in the soup industry. Because it uses a rich variety of high-grade ingredients and perfectly blends the characteristics of the various ingredients, it becomes a delicacy with great deliciousness and high nutritional value. Therefore, Buddha Jumps Over the Wall deserves its reputation as a high-grade dish. The system introduced seriously. Very good. I'm very satisfied. Meg's face was already full of smiles. He had eaten Buddha Jumps Over the Wall before. However, at that time, he felt that it was just as so-so. It probably wasn't too authentic. But now, the system had given him a recipe. Moreover, it was the modified version of the Otherworld Demon. If it could be classified as a high-grade dish by him, the taste would definitely not be bad. Of course, he was more curious about the special effects of Buddha Jumps Over the Wall, which was classified as a high-grade dish. Mr. Meg, why are you so happy? At this moment, a voice sounded behind Meg. Calm. Wonderful book house. Chapter 1064. Meg, who had just won the lottery, opened his eyes. He turned around and looked at Hill, who was standing behind him. He realized that he had been too immersed in the lottery and had let his guard down. I just had an interesting dream, Meg said with a smile. He stood up and looked at Hill. May I know why Miss Hill is here? If I say that I want to have a cup of tea with Mr. Meg, I wonder if Mr. Meg will agree. Hill looked at Meg with a smile. Since Miss Hill is already standing here, how can I refuse? Meg asked with a smile. He gestured to the seat beside him and said, the sun is just right today. Why don't we sit outside and drink tea under the sun? Sure. Hill nodded. She walked straight to the table and sat down. Meg went into the house and took out a tea set. He boiled the Yixing clay teapot on the small stove and sprinkled some black tea. The aroma of the tea drifted out of the teapot. Taking a light sniff would make one feel peaceful and comfortable. It was a winter morning and the sun was shining brightly. The two of them sat opposite each other with a cup of black tea in the middle. Neither of them spoke. Hill stared at Meg for a long time. He just looked at the Yixing clay teapot calmly. He didn't even look at her. She had seen many men who didn't look at her. However, those men just wanted to hide their panic, so they deliberately looked elsewhere. Their flickering eyes quickly exposed their thoughts. However, Meg was different. His eyes were calm and focused. It was as if there was something more beautiful than her on the Yixing clay teapot. Even looking at her was superfluous. She had never met such a man before. This guy. Am I really not as beautiful as a teapot? Hill felt unconvinced. Although she didn't care about men's gazes, she was used to being stared at. Now that she was ignored, she felt uncomfortable. System, what are the effects of this Buddha Jumps Over the Wall? Host, please explore by yourself. System, this high-grade dish is so powerful. Will there be any side effects? What if she gets sick from eating it? Host, please explore on your own and consider how to prepare the medicine, dishes. What use do I have for you? Meg couldn't help but roll his eyes in his heart. What was the use of this system if it didn't answer his questions? This tea is quite fragrant. The Hill smiled and broke the silence. Unlike Meg, she did not have the leisure to sit here and bask in the sun all morning. Yes, it's good tea. Meg ended the conversation with the system and naturally took over the Hill's words. He lifted the teapot and poured a cup of tea for her. The tea was clear and beautiful, with a strong tea aroma. This was the De Hong Pao from Wui Mountain that he had bought from the system. Naturally, it was a good tea, but there wasn't much of it. If it weren't for Mr. Hill's request, he wouldn't have been willing to share it with anyone else. Hill took the small white porcelain teacup. The fragrance of the tea made her eyes light up. Her grandfather loved both red wine and tea. In recent years, he had been fishing and drinking tea when he had nothing to do. She would also drink tea with him when she was free, so she knew a little about tea. Her grandfather's favorite tea was the Assam black tea produced in the Goblin's Assam Valley. Because the production was very small, it was not easy to buy. A few years ago, because he was unable to buy black tea once, he bought the entire Assam Valley in one go and built a tea base. He produced and sold his own tea and only provided for himself. Occasionally, he would give a little to his friends as a gift. The black tea made by Mr. Meg had a stronger aroma than the Assam black tea. She lifted the teacup and gently blew on it, then carefully took a small sip. This taste. The Hill's eyes lit up. The aroma was rich, and the taste was sweet and mellow. After swallowing, the lasting aroma lingered in her mouth, making her feel refreshed. Good tea. Even though Mr. Hill had tasted many good teas, she couldn't help but praise. Even her grandfather's favorite Assam black tea paled in comparison to this. Grandfather will definitely like this tea, Mr. Hill thought with certainty. Meg took a sip of tea, put down the teacup, and looked at Mr. Hill with a smile. Miss Hill, you're so busy. You're not just here to drink tea with me, right? Mr. Hill was a strong woman. She usually didn't come to the restaurant for meals. She would only appear here when she had something to do. The improvement work on the steam locomotive has been completed. However, during this time, Chief Engineer Blair has led the research and development team to try to add a magic array to the steam locomotive to increase its speed. Recently, there has been a breakthrough. However, there are some problems in practical use that can't be solved. I hope to get some help from Mr. Meg. Mrs. Hill looked at Meg and said. A modified version of the train. Meg was more surprised when he heard that. Mrs. Hill said apologetically, these things are not within the scope of our cooperation. I'm sorry to trouble Mr. Meg. I don't know much about magic, so I may not be able to help much. However, I'm quite interested in this modified version of the train. I may not have enough time in the morning, but I can go there during the lunch break. Meg nodded. He didn't refuse, but he didn't say too much either. He was indeed curious about what would happen when technology met magic. A modified version of the train. Could its speed be close to that of a high-speed railway? Okay, someone will come to pick you up at noon today. Mrs. Hill smiled, then took out a piece of paper and placed it in front of Meg. This is a letter of appointment. I want to hire you as the chief consultant of the steam locomotive project. This way, if I need your help in the future, I'll feel less apologetic when I ask, Mrs. Hill said. Meg glanced at the 7-figure annual salary and pushed the letter of appointment back to Mrs. Hill. He smiled and shook his head. If I sign this, I'll feel more apologetic when I refuse in the future. Mr. Meg, do you think the salary is too low? No, I just don't like to be restrained. Meg shook his head. If I'm free, I'll be happy to participate in the steam locomotive project. After all, I'm also one of the shareholders. However, the premise is that I'm free. Mrs. Hill stared at Meg for a while, then put away the letter of appointment and said with a smile, then I'll have to trouble Mr. Meg. Mrs. Hill quietly finished the black tea in the teacup, put down the teacup, and asked curiously, what kind of tea is this? How much do you still have, Mr. Meg? I wonder if you can sell me some. My grandfather loves tea, so he'll definitely like this good tea. It's just a little wild tea. There's not much left, so I can't sell it. Meg decisively shook his head and refused. The system had sold him less than a caddy of black tea, which was too little for him to drink. How could he sell it? However, according to the system, this was due to the first year of transplant cultivation. The output should increase in the following years. Chapter 1065. After watching the carriage leave on the hill, Meg poured himself another cup of tea. As he watched the steam rise slowly in front of his eyes, he squinted slightly and looked at a big tree not far away from him. A figure was leaning against the big tree and peeking in that direction. This person had been here for a while, and Meg quickly noticed him because he wasn't very professional. He was wearing a full set of black clothes and a hat in broad daylight. The only thing missing was the words "I'm a spy" written on his forehead to indicate his identity. An enemy is here. Or is he targeting me to make a fortune? Meg raised his eyebrows. From the situation he sensed, it should be a human with a strength of about 6th tier. It was obvious that he was coming for him. There was too little information, and Meg couldn't deduce anything. That man in black stood behind the tree for a while before pulling down the brim of his hat and turning around to leave. Meg thought about it, and didn't choose to follow him. A 6th tier strength couldn't even break through the automatic defense of the restaurant. What kind of threat could he pose? Since he came to scout during the day, he would most likely take action at night. In that case, he would wait until nighttime to see what he wanted to do. In a deserted alley, 3 men in black with black hats gathered together. One was tall and thin, one was short and fat, and the last one was a well-built man. "Boss, have you really scouted the place? We're going to make a big fortune this time. As long as we succeed, the 3 of us won't have to worry about anything," the thin man whispered. "Nonsense, when have I ever had a problem? As long as Fatty's information is correct, that restaurant really has a divine weapon that can make super delicious grilled fish by itself. We'll definitely succeed tonight," Colby said with a confident smile. "It's definitely correct. I saw the boss take out delicious grilled fish from that black divine weapon with my own eyes." Fatty nodded with certainty, and a nostalgic smile appeared on his face as he said, "That taste was really delicious. Furthermore, one fish costs 2,500 copper coins, and there are so many people ordering it. As long as we can get this divine weapon, we'll just have to lie down and collect money every day. Furthermore, we'll be able to eat delicious grilled fish every day. Eat, eat, eat. You're already as fat as a ball and all you know is to eat." Colby patted the fatty's head, and a smile appeared at the corner of his lips. "When I have money, I want to drink the strongest alcohol and ride the wildest women." 1, 2, 3. After the lunch service ended, Meg looked at Gina, who was happily counting mud casings in the corner. He couldn't help but ask, "Gina, why are you collecting so many mud casings? Even if it's supper, you can't eat that much, right?" Gina stared at Meg for a while before she understood what he meant. She pointed at the mud casing and then at her mouth. She waved her hand, indicating that it was not for her to eat. She then gestured with her fishtail and said, "My clansmen, they eat." Meg spent quite some time to understand what Gina meant. It turned out that Gina had prepared these mud casings for the merfolk like her. It seemed like she wanted them to have the ability to breathe on land as well. However, Gina didn't even know where she came from, nor did she know where her home was. No matter how many mud casings she collected, she probably wouldn't be able to give them to her clansmen. Moreover, what made Meg more curious was, wasn't it good for the merfolk to live in the sea? There were no territorial disputes, and they were free. They also had an endless supply of fish. Why did they have to come to the mainland to fight for living space with other races? Big sister Gina can't speak or write, but she can draw. Why don't we let her use drawing to communicate with us? Amy asked curiously as she walked over with Ugly Duckling in her arms. "Oh, right. That's a good idea." Meg's eyes lit up. He actually didn't think of such a simple idea. Little kids could indeed find the simplest and most effective way. Meg passed a pen and paper to Gina, and then gestured as he said, "Gina, if you have something to say to me, just use drawing." Simple daily communication could be carried out using body language. However, slightly more complicated conversations obviously couldn't be carried out using body language between races with completely different worldviews. Gina's eyes also lit up when she saw the pen and paper. She picked up the pen clumsily, and quickly learned how to control her strength to draw lines on the paper without breaking the pen or tearing the paper directly under Meg's guidance. Everyone in the restaurant surrounded Gina curiously as she sat in front of the table. Everyone was very curious about Gina's background. However, due to the fact that they couldn't communicate with words, they still couldn't figure out where Gina came from and why she came after so many days. Gina thought for a while, and then started drawing. Murlocs with human bodies and fish tails quickly appeared under her pen. They surrounded a circular platform that looked like an altar. In the center of the altar, there was an old Murloc in a long robe. He seemed to be presiding over some solemn and mysterious ceremony. Although it was her first time drawing on paper with a pen, Gina's drawing was surprisingly good. Although she reduced some details for the sake of speed, those simple lines still made people feel the solemnity of the crowded merfolk. There are so many merfolk. What are they doing? Are they praying for pies to fall from the sky? Amy asked curiously as she knelt on another chair and looked at the drawing. Looks like it's indeed a very big merfolk tribe. Meg was deep in thought. Although there were only a dozen merfolk drawn on the paper, there were more wavy lines that represented the crowded merfolk. Gina didn't explain. Instead, she quickly started drawing the second drawing. A beam of light appeared above the altar, and then a projection of an image appeared in the sky. All the merfolk had surprised expressions on their faces. Could it be a revelation? Elizabeth exclaimed softly with a look of disbelief on her face. A revelation? Everyone looked at Elizabeth curiously. What is that? Big Sister Elizabeth, Amy asked. It said that there's a supreme god on the Norland continent. Among the various races, the elves worship the god of life, the forest trolls worship the god of strength, and the orcs worship their respective totem gods. No one has seen God before, but there are occasional revelations. Hence, many people still believe in the existence of God, Irina explained. Gina couldn't understand their conversation and didn't explain. Instead, she started drawing the next drawing. The chaotic image of the revelation stopped, and a restaurant appeared on the screen. A young man was standing in front of the restaurant. Isn't that Father? And our restaurant? Amy exclaimed softly. Everyone looked at the painting in shock, their faces filled with disbelief. Isn't it just a slideshow? What's the fuss? The system mumbled. Calm. Wonderful book house. Calm. Chapter 1066. Meg looked at himself in the drawing, and he was a little confused. The distinctive black and white chef's uniform, the distinct outline of his face, the signature mustache, and the restaurant behind him with the sign, Mamie's, all revealed his identity. The person in the picture of the revelation that Gina had drawn was indeed him. What's going on? Is the so-called god of this world the same as the heavenly axiom that brought him here? Or is he being targeted by other gods? Meg couldn't understand it either. This was already beyond his understanding. He looked at the first picture again. The top of the altar was covered in layers of darkness, and it made him feel a little depressed. The mermaids' faces were also filled with anticipation and desire, as if they were praying for God to appear. After the revelation, the mermaids looked at him in the picture with ecstasy. It was similar to Gina's expression when she saw him for the first time. But, what did this have to do with him? No matter how one looked at it, a chef like him did not look like a savior. Meg looked at Gina. He wanted to know what was going to happen next, or rather, what was the deeper meaning behind this revelation. Gina looked up at Meg, and then continued drawing. The fourth picture quickly appeared under her pen. In this picture, Gina appeared. She was standing in a circular teleportation portal. The priest in a black robe and a middle-aged merman with a crown on his head were standing beside the altar. Further away, a black mass of mermen was surrounding the teleportation portal. They were looking at Gina, who was on the teleportation portal, with anticipation in their eyes. Is Sister Gina the hope of the entire village? Amy mumbled. It seems so. Meg was deep in thought. After looking at the four pictures, he roughly knew why Gina appeared here. The mermaids must have received a revelation from God to find the person in the picture. He was the chosen one that the mermaids were looking for. Gina was chosen as the mermaids' representative. She took the ancient teleportation portal and was very lucky to meet him. A mermaid who could not survive on land. Because of a mysterious revelation, the mermaid princess Gina came ashore with a one-way ticket without any hesitation. What a foolish worship. Wasn't this taking their lives as a joke? Why? Meg asked Gina. He still could not understand the mermaid tribe's actions. Isn't the sea good? Was it necessary to come ashore? Gina noticed Meg's confusion. She thought for a while and continued to draw on the paper. It was a black curtain that stretched across the sky, blocking all the light. One by one, the merfolk attacked the black curtain. Some were injured and fell, some died directly in the black curtain, but none of the merfolk could break through the black curtain. Although it was just a still image, everyone felt a little depressed when they looked at it. What is that? Meg's voice slowed down as he asked Gina. Gina stopped writing and shook her head. She looked equally perplexed. However, she quickly picked up the pen again and continued to draw on the paper. The altar was activated, and she appeared in a desert. She walked carefully on the desert, but the smile on her face and the light in her eyes had never appeared in the darkness. The image changed, and she appeared in a barren valley. That was the location of her second teleportation. Although the surroundings were barren, and she had lost the water source on her, her expression was still bright. The image changed again, and she appeared in the restaurant. Meg, who was glowing with golden light, appeared again. He brought her back to life as if he was the savior. Do I have a golden light special effect in her eyes? Meg raised his eyebrows and tried not to laugh. Next was the image of Gina waking up. In the image, she had a happy smile on her face. However, there was a big bubble on her head that was filled with water. She did not seem to fit in with this world. The image changed again. Meg, who had a golden light special effect, was in the kitchen. He held a small wooden hammer in his hand, and there was an egg glowing with golden light in front of him. It's the beggar's chicken. Amy was the first to recognize it. What does it have to do with the beggar's chicken? Yabamiya did not understand. Gina should be able to breathe on land after eating the beggar's chicken, Meg said thoughtfully. He knew about this. As expected, the next image was of Gina eating the beggar's chicken with a piece of mud casing. The water bubble burst, and Gina was surprised to find that she had the ability to breathe on land. In the image, she opened her arms to embrace the world, and revealed a pure smile. Everyone could not help but smile as well. They felt that they had been healed by this story. Gina did not stop writing. The image changed again. Under the dark curtain, the mermaids were still looking up with hope. They seemed to be waiting for something. Clack. Gina put down her pen and looked up at Meg. Her expression was similar to the mermaids looking up under the dark curtain. Her eyes were also filled with hope. The restaurant was silent. Everyone's gaze fell on Meg. It was a silent portrait, but it vividly showed a mermaid tribe struggling under the dark curtain. And all their hopes were placed on Meg alone. "Father, why don't you make more beggar's chicken for them? They look so pitiful," Amy said softly, full of pity. Meg was not in a hurry to express his opinion. His gaze swept across the images spread out on the table. From the images, the mermaid tribe should be trapped under some kind of seal or curse at the bottom of the dark sea. Their location should be somewhere deep under the sea. There were no coordinates or specific depth. Although he already had the ability of a grade 7, he did not have the ability to dive deep into the sea, nor could he breathe underwater. It was even more impossible for him to make beggar's chicken for them at the bottom of the sea. Although he pitied Gina, he was indeed not a savior. He could not make any rash promises. "This place, where is it?" Meg asked Gina as he pointed at the first image. "Lanti te," Gina enunciated each word clearly. "Lantist." Meg repeated after her. Although he did not know where this place was, the name of this place might be an important breakthrough point. There was a knock on the door. Mia went to open it and quickly shouted at the door, "Boss, he said he's here to pick you up." "All right, I'm coming," Meg responded. It seemed like Miss Hill's people were here. He kept the images that Gina had drawn and could not help but praise, "Gina, it's a pity that you're not a cartoonist. Your drawing style and storytelling are all genius." "Cartoonist?" Gina repeated as she looked at Mag, perplexed. "You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."